All right, I guess we've got four people, including me, five people, including me. And the way the rules will be set up here is unless I've interacted with you on a somewhat regular basis and know who you are, you're gonna have to send a direct message to talk, and I'll read your direct message. Basically, just say like who you are, one sentence, and why you want to talk one sentence, and I'll decide whether or not you should get up here. Part of the reason is because when I do these things, people love my spaces, specifically to come up and say crazy things about how terrible of a person I am. So we're gonna try to avoid that by simply having these DMs that have to be sent before you come up as a speaker. And I know some of you, so those of you who I know are not gonna have to do that. And maybe if it's just such a small audience, I guess it depends on the size of the audience. It's really small. We'll just go ahead and like have everybody come up. But if it gets past, 10 users, we'll start doing that other system. Otherwise, like, I don't know. I don't want like in front of like 100 people for like some person to start ranting inanely. So, okay, so that's what we're going to do. So basically, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the study, and anybody who wants to talk about it in response can make their own observations and provide some of their own thoughts. So there's this study that just came out. I'm going to provide the link actually in the, let's see if I know how to do this properly. In the, apparently there's a way to add like stuff at the top. Let's see if I can learn how to do that. I don't even know how to do that. Does anybody know how to do that? To add like apparently there's a way to add like at the top of the window, there's a way to add like tweets or studies or something. Let's see. I don't know. I'm pressing random words to try different things. Um, because I don't know, this is like, I've run spaces before, but I've never used that feature, and I feel like that feature is going to be important for what we're doing. So if anybody knows, raise your hand. Okay, I'll let that person. How to even invite them. Everything is going bananas. How do I get rid of it? I see. Somebody raised their hand to speak and wants to help? No? I thought somebody did. All right, well, let me just go ahead and post the link, and it'll be on my feed until I learn how to add, onto like that scrolling thing at the top. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? There's like a scrolling list of links at the top. Whatever. And somebody just sent me a DM. Let me see if they're... Okay, nobody sent a relevant one. All right, so I'll just go post the link on my feed, and then people can look at it if I can't figure out how to do to the top the link to the study, and I'll post the link to a couple other articles about the study as well. And then I'll just introduce the study, provide a few details on it, and then we can have a discussion if people want to discuss as well. So first, the link I'm going to provide in the thread underneath the Spaces announcement on my timeline is a popular article by Daily Mail, which, I mean, it's all right. It's like a British tabloid. And then I'm going to post the study itself beneath that. And of course, people are going to be mad because I'm posting the Daily Mail. Somebody's always mad about something. But I'll post the study below that as well. And then I'll post all of those. And then as we get on, we'll maybe add additional things. So basically, this is an epidemiological study of about 100 million vaccinated people. I think it's something like 160 million doses, or it's under 200 million doses, but total 100 million vaccinated people individually. And it's just comparing the rate of different adverse events that are particularly relevant to the COVID vaccine based on animal models or based on previous reports or based on the sort of theories or mechanisms about what kinds of adverse events could occur from this COVID vaccine. And it's comparing those within the 42 days after getting the COVID vaccine compared to the background number of these kinds of events that happen just randomly. Of course, they're not entirely by chance. There's a cause, but they're relatively uncommon. And so, uh, what is the rate of those events in the background normally? And by looking at the difference between the rate in those 42 days after you have the vaccine and the normal rate, the normal background rate, and I believe they calculate that for the 5 years prior to 2020, by looking at the difference between those two and actually calculating a fold change difference. So for, say, myocarditis, if you see 4 times more myocarditis during that 42-day period than you would otherwise see it during a normal 42-day period over those previous 5 years, then you have a fivefold higher risk of myocarditis. That's how they calculate the fold changes, the fold differences. A few things that I'll say about this is they did this in multiple different countries: France, Australia, I want to say Sweden as well. Um, Let me go look. Actually, I have the supplemental information pulled up. And Australia, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, New Zealand, Scotland, and maybe some other locations as well, depending with the endpoint. And they basically just look at individual medical records, and they looked at like when the person got the vaccine and like when they reported a certain outcome. Now, it's very important to understand that this is an underreport of the adverse event rate. To the degree which this is an underreport is not clear. We don't know how much is underreported, but we do know that not all adverse events are going to be reported to the hospitals or to the doctors, and so those unreported events don't get recorded. So people they could die, they could have a heart attack, they could have all sorts of other things that happen. If it just doesn't make it into the system for whatever reason, then it's not going to be part of these numbers. So these numbers are smaller, they're more conservative than the real numbers. By how much? It's anybody's guess. It's probably not like 10 times smaller, but it's at least a substantial amount smaller than the actual real numbers. So these are all underestimates of the adverse event rates from the vaccines on these outcomes. What else is important? Yeah, I think that's like a basic introduction to the study. And so I'll just talk about some of the event rates and like what we would expect compared to what we already know. And maybe some of the things that we have had sort of confirmed to us that we had suspected and stuff like that. So the biggest thing that we saw, the biggest effect is usually for Moderna and the myocarditis. That's like a very common side effect that we've known for a long time. That's the biggest safety signal that we've been aware of for the longest time now. People have said that since the rate of myocarditis from COVID is higher than the rate of myocarditis from the vaccine, therefore you should get the vaccine because you're still going to prevent more COVID. You're going to still prevent more myocarditis than you're going to cause. And there's some partial truth to that, but the caveat to that particular argument is that the rate of myocarditis in different age groups is different. And the rate of myocarditis caused by COVID is different. So in people who are very young, the rate of myocarditis caused by the vaccine is much higher than the rate of myocarditis caused by COVID. Whereas if you're much significantly older, the rate of COVID is higher than the rate caused by the vaccine. So the trade-offs for myocarditis are different depending upon what age you're talking about. And one of the problems with the mainstream media and how they reported a lot of the myocarditis science to try to debunk what people were saying about the COVID vaccine causing myocarditis, the problem with those reports early on, maybe about a year or two ago, especially when this was really a hot topic, was that they would only report the rate of myocarditis for the whole population. They wouldn't age stratify. So one of the issues, I think, there's a broad, I would say almost a broad consensus among people who are very well informed about the vaccine and this particular issue and know the literature very well. I wouldn't say according to official recommendations, but I would say according to thoughtful and intelligent people. There's a very strong contingent of very thoughtful, intelligent, scientific people who think that the trade-off between COVID myocarditis and the vaccine myocarditis really should have been thought of on an age stratified basis. Obviously, for older people, the trade-off is more favorable for the vaccine, but it's much less favorable for younger people, and maybe the vaccine in those cases might not be as well justified. And myocarditis isn't the only outcome from COVID. There's other outcomes as well, and myocarditis is not the only outcome from the vaccine. There's other outcomes, but if you compare all the severe outcomes from the vaccine for younger people, especially younger males, compared to older people, sorry, all the downsides of the vaccine for younger males, especially compared to the downsides of COVID, which tends to be very mild in younger males, I think it's very clear that the vaccine is a little bit worse. Now, is it like massively worse? Like, is the vaccine causing young people to drop dead left and right? No, it's still relatively rare. But as far as the bad outcomes from COVID are concerned, they're also relatively rare, but they're just more rare than the downsides from the vaccine are in that particular young demographic. And so that discussion was never had. One of the reasons that this was suggested during one of the press conferences that Rochelle Walensky, then the director at CDC, she provided a reason for why they were ignoring this particular piece of data and this idea. She said that we're trying to simplify the message about vaccines so everybody should universally get it, and they're just trying to make public health more simple. That was their rationale, at least stated to the public. I don't buy that, because I think people can pretty much easily understand, hey, if you're under 35, you don't need the vaccine. If you're over 35, you do. Like, you don't need to like make it that complicated. Like, if everybody just knows that age, I mean, if you start to get into like really complex stuff, if you're over 35, but then also perfectly healthy, so then you have to wait until 55 to get the vaccine, then it gets a little bit more complicated. We can start talking about maybe the public health messaging might be simplified from there. But if you think about health recommendations that your doctor gives you, whenever they do calculations on whether or not you should receive a statin, they do a very complex calculation in a risk calculator to determine whether or not you should see a statin, including like 4 or 5 different variables depending upon the cardiovascular risk calculator that you do. So I don't see why you can't take into account all risk factors to decide whether or not you should get a vaccine or not, if the vaccine has more downsides than positives in particularly healthy and especially young people. So I don't understand why they couldn't have done that with the vaccine. They do that with cardiovascular disease. So what was the rationale there? Of course, they never said that because the interviewer on television probably didn't have the background to understand that that's a reasonable question, or maybe they just didn't want to lose their pharma funding, whatever it is. But for whatever reason, they decided to just give one recommendation. And of course, the cynical interpretation would be that it's because it benefits pharma. and, and if you're at the CDC or the FDA, there's just tons of links to pharma, and so you don't want to sour those relationships. If you do something that might make the pharma angry or Pfizer angry, then you might like lose opportunities in the future for collaboration, et cetera. So there might be subterranean, sort of beneath the surface considerations that people were using in order to make that idea that we're trying to simplify the public health messaging. Maybe it wasn't really about that at all. And I don't really believe that that's the real reason, because for the reasons I've just given, it's not that difficult to stratify by age and just make that recommendation to the public. It's not that hard. And I would also argue that by making those sorts of stratifications, by taking account to risk factors, by noticing that, the risk benefit is different for different populations, you would gain more trust from the population. You'd gain more trust from people, because then people would say, hey, look, they're looking after our health. They're not just trying to push as many vaccines as possible. They care about us. They're only trying to make sure that we need the vaccine if it makes sense for our particular group. I think that would dramatically increase trust in the vaccine. So if you really care about public health, that approach would have been far better to maintain the credibility of the CDC and of public health than the sort of universal vaccination strategy that we used, which I think cost credibility. But what did it gain? It gained money for pharma. So if you want to make the trade-off, maybe you're actually going more for those pharma dollars. And so I think that's probably the real reason, in my humble opinion. Okay, so I just went on a big rant about myocarditis and age stratification. But one of the other interesting things about, and if somebody wants to like butt in and talk while I'm talking or has a thought, and it's gotten to like too long, if I like talk for like another 30 minutes without interruption, and somebody wants to butt in, please raise your hand. I'll be keeping my eye on the the room, and it looks like more people are coming in. We're almost at like a full room, meaning it's almost filling up my screen on my phone. I only have 12 slots. That's cool. Anyway, so the other thing that was very interesting is it also has this signal for blood clots. And as we know, and I really wish I could add a link to the top here. I really wish I knew how this worked. About spaces, adjust settings, view rules, as you can reply, turn on captions. What about spaces? No, it's like terrible. I can't add another thing to the top. There's this chat thing that people are saying. To put stuff at the top, share it. And if you're a speaker, it'll allow you to share it to the space. Beautiful. So let me share it. Share via post? No. I have to share. No, I can't share the group. I have to share something to the group. How do I share it to the group to make something at the top? How do I do that? Like, which button do I push? Now I'm gonna have you as a speaker. What is it? Michael Glidewell. I want to say Malcolm Gladwell because I'm sure you get that a lot. I'm sorry. Apologize for that. I'm gonna invite you to speak so you can tell me how to do that. Did I invite you to speak, or did I fail? I think I invited you. Can you help me figure out how to do that?
Let me see if I can do it now that I'm a speaker. You go ahead and talk, and I'll try to share the you want the paper, right?
What do I want? I want there was this one post I made about blood clots in strokes for the vaccine, and then people kept saying I was spreading misinformation. And this happened like half a year ago, and they're like, "You shouldn't be a medical student. You should be kicked out of med school." But it turns out like I'm right. I'm actually like completely right, and this paper confirms that I'm right. I'm gonna send it to you actually over DM, and then you can then why is my X failing on my desktop? It's being weird. And then you can share it with the group, and then once you share it with the group, tell me how do I do it.
Okay, I'll do that. I have to look at it every time, so it's
Yeah, I
not
just
easy.
sent it
It's
to
not
you
intuitive.
from October 2nd. I sent it over DM. And basically, what me and Michael are talking about, or what I'm talking about to Michael, is that in 2018, the guy who won the Nobel Prize for mRNA vaccines, Drew Weissman, I think he won the Nobel Prize like last year, literally, in around I think August. I want to say the Nobel Prizes were given. I can't even remember, but it was last year. And I said in this post, he warned about the potential risks of mRNA vaccines, including development of autoimmunity and blood coagulation, pathological thrombus formation. So, in this paper from 2018, he said that another study showed that extracellular RNA promoted blood coagulation and pathological thrombus formation, which is talking about blood clots. That's like a blood clot, a thrombus. And of course, that is a big concern of people who are concerned about strokes, having had strokes because of the vaccine. That was talked about a lot. Of course, when you looked at the randomized controlled trial evidence in the Moderna and Pfizer randomized controlled trials, you didn't see a statistically significant effect of that, but you saw it. It was there. It wasn't statistically significant in either trial, but both of it very consistently had like a doubling of the amounts of blood clots, coagulation disorders that got produced as a result. So that confirmed this sort of mechanistic concern from 2018, or at least in this 2018 paper, this review that talked about the mechanistic concern. The study might be from before 2018, but it confirmed this idea that blood coagulation, blood clots, strokes even potentially could happen as a result of the vaccines. And so, but then people said it's not statistically significant. And so what we get this study is quite statistically significant. You have blood clots, so you have multiple different angles. You have mechanistic studies. You have a non-statistically significant, consistent effect in both randomized controlled trials for the mRNA vaccines. And then for this particular study, you found, again, the mRNA vaccines cause these blood clots. And let me actually check another thing because I'm actually a little bit curious about this. And again, you guys can interrupt me. How did you do that, Michael? How did you put that thing up there?
There's that little share button at the bottom right, with a little the three little dots that are connected,
The three little
and you
dots,
hit,
okay.
well, the two
Oh, the
dots
other
to the
button.
right and one dot to the left. You hit that, and then at the top will be share to your space.
Oh my gosh. I think my phone is so old, it doesn't have that button. Like I literally don't even have the button. Like I have the three dot button, and then I have like the arrow coming out of like the box button, the arrow coming out of the
Well,
tray. Is the arrow coming out of the tray one you're talking about? Or the three dots? It is the three dots button.
it's not three dots. It's hang on.
It's the arrow coming out of the tray. That's usually the share button, right? Because I don't have a share to your space sort of thing that comes up. I have invite via DM, share via post, but that's sharing the space or via post. Copy link and share via, so I'm not having share to space. Maybe my phone is just way too old. Um, I'm gonna go into my spaces from my desktop. I might end up. I'm not gonna go there. Do you hear
Yeah,
me,
I think
Michael?
you have to. Yeah, you have to share from your phone. I don't think there's a way to do it from your desktop. It's the little share button at the bottom of a post. So to the far right on the bottom of a post is your little share button. It's three little open dots connected with lines.
Oh, oh, I
That
think I know
one.
what you're
And
talking
then
about.
you hit that, and then it says
Oh, I
share,
got
and
it.
then you look at the
Got
very
it.
top. There you go.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much, Michael. All right, I finally
You're
have
welcome.
my
Like I said, I have to like hunt around and find it every time.
yeah. So that's this post, and then I talk about all the stuff I just talked about in this post. You can see very clearly the elevation in blood clot risk in both the Pfizer and the Moderna study. You had 20 an incidence of 20 coagulation disorders in the vaccine group in the Moderna trial and 13 in the placebo. It's almost a doubling. And you had similarly 16 in the vaccine group and 10 in the placebo group in the Pfizer trial. Almost like, one and a half, a little more than one and a half times 1.6. And so, and everybody said, no, that's not real. You're sharing misinformation. Well, it's consistent between those things. It's mechanistically consistent. And then now we're seeing it in this giant observational study. And the magnitude of that increase in this observational study, let's find it. Hematological conditions. And one of those is going to be, yeah, it depends on the vaccine, but it's a little less than 1.5, right? And it's mostly for the first dose. The second dose is a smaller increase. But interestingly, um, it's not just the mRNA vaccine, right? It's also the AstraZeneca vaccine. Which am I mistaken to think that the AstraZeneca that was a adenovirus? Is that right? Just want to double check. Right, it's an adenovirus vaccine. So it's interesting. It's not just the mRNA mechanism, but it's just both. Maybe it has to do with spike protein. Regardless of what the mechanism is, that blood clot, uh, it's like a threefold increase in blood clots. And it's interesting because blood clots are kind of common. I mean, they're not like super common, but like a lot of people die from blood clots. Like the leading cause of death for for the plurality of people, like the leading cause of death in men is heart attack, and heart attack is a blood clot. And so having a threefold increase in the rate of blood clots is substantial, because that's a common thing that happens, especially in older people. So it's quite interesting. And of course, as I said, the myocarditis signal is huge, but it's actually interesting. In some places, it was calculated as much bigger than other places, which suggests that the six-fold increase rate of myocarditis might be quite underestimating the real rate. And so let me go show you guys what the increase in myocarditis is in some other places. So again, it's about six-fold increase for the Moderna vaccine for the second dose, but if you that's an overall. But if you look at Australia and New South Wales, it's 13-fold. If you look at Victoria, it's 23-fold or 24-fold increase in risk of myocarditis above baseline in the population. So for every one case of myocarditis that you would have in that same 42-day period, you're increasing it to 24 cases, right? And that's probably even more the case among young people than it is among older people. So in younger men with a robust immune response, you might even get a higher rate. And the reason for that difference may just be differences in sort of the sensitivity of medical diagnosis or the tendency for people to go to doctors. If you see that, look in these areas like Australia where people are, I would say, maybe more health conscious. Maybe they're like reporting if they're having chest pain earlier, whereas other places where they're like less inclined to be that way, maybe like in France where they may have like an anti-authoritarian bent to not want to go to doctors, their rate of myocarditis is only fourfold increase. So maybe there's just a ton of unreported myocarditis going on, depending upon the severity of it. I know that I had, when I got pericarditis from the vaccine, I remember posting about it. I can actually even link my post here. That's actually funny. I'll link my post to my weird post about myocarditis and potentially having myocarditis, and asking Twitter if I should go to the hospital because I wasn't sure what the heck I had. Um, myo, maybe just heart. I can't remember what the search term is. Oh, actually, so this is before I deleted. This is in the period before I deleted I deleted everything like before December because I didn't want people like have garbage on me so that they could use to hurt me. So I just like deleted my social media presence after I posted and started writing about COVID. It didn't help, but yeah, so I deleted it. But I actually literally asked Twitter. I wasn't sure, and they're like, "Oh my God, you should go to the doctor." I went to the doctor and I had pericarditis. The funny thing is if I ever have like occasionally, I had another incident of it recently, like 3 months ago, when I had a respiratory infection, and I think it's gonna flare up for like the rest of my life. I'm gonna have pericarditis, and so I had to take NSAIDs and colchicine to get it to go away. Anyway, the point is that different depending on the severity and like sort of the health consciousness or the willingness of people to go to doctors, the the records of the rates of adverse events could be really substantially lower than the actual true rate. So in France, as I said, fourfold difference. But then if you're looking at Victoria and Australia, 24-fold difference. So there could be a six-fold, that's as much of a six-fold variation in the reported rate of myocarditis. It could be very similar for um, the other adverse events. So we might be thinking for something like not Guillain-Barré, but not even ADE, um, but for something like, well, for something like blood clots, right? I mean, you could have a blood clot and just not go to the doctor, right? It could happen. To like lose sensation in your hand, and you're like, well, what is this? And you just kind of ignore it for a couple days, and it goes away or it doesn't go away, and you just like have lost sensation in the hand. Well, you're just like, I don't know why. Uh, like that can just happen, and that can happen all the time. Like you're too busy to go look into it. So so anyway, this is to say these are maybe even substantial underestimates by as much as sixfold, right? These rates. Okay, so I talked about this age stratification. I talked about blood clots. So blood clots could be quite higher. It could be like tenfold increase. In reality, it's just not being reported. Um, and I know that AstraZeneca is known for having blood clots, but actually the other vaccines although they didn't show, according to this cutoff of a twofold increase in blood, or sorry, a 1.5-fold increase in the adverse event. For all the other vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, they both showed an increase in blood clots. It just was below the 1.5-fold increase. And the reasoning of the paper, why they wanted to still include those figures in the paper, that and just make note of that, that again, there might be an underreporting. So even though it says below 1.5-fold increase, it could be substantially higher. And so those other vaccines may also be contributing to a clinically significant increase in blood clots as well, not just the AstraZeneca. Okay, so what else? So Guillain-Barré is kind of common. Like that's a common thing that people get from vaccines. Basically, you get like temporary paralysis, or at least it should be temporary. And I don't know. I'm not a Guillain-Barré expert. I've always been taught that it's mostly temporary. It's demyelinating. The myelin grows back. It may not, but it's usually temporary. And you get like temporary paralysis. It's pretty terrible. But a noted side effect of many vaccines, including flu vaccines and many other vaccines, and many viruses, of course. But yeah, but one of the scary things is swelling of the brain and spinal cord. So what we've noticed, if you look on social media and you see people talking about their adverse events from the vaccines, that's like one thing you hear about, these weird neural things that can happen. And it appears like it's consistent. What is found in this study is consistent with those reported vaccine adverse events. And so I think that's very interesting. That the anecdotes end up matching the data. I don't think they always necessarily do. And here's one of the things I'll say to you guys, which I think maybe many of you guys are very sympathetic to this idea that there's vaccine injuries by just being in this group. But I will provide this caveat because I tend to try to like question my own beliefs. If you look at like the long COVID community, obviously a lot of that's psychosomatic, right? Like obviously, no, not all of it. Like there's real long COVID, and it's probably just any other sort of post-viral syndrome. And some people have bad versions of it, especially if they're like hospitalized for a substantial amount of time, or they go under anesthesia, or sorry, they go under sedation to get ventilators and stuff. Like then you can get brain damage, and like you can have long-term effects on all sorts of organ systems from having a viral infection, and that's freaking real. That's completely real. But it's probably not any different for COVID than any other virus. If you adjust for severity, if you have another viral infection of the same severity, there's no difference in the rates of post-viral syndrome between COVID and other viruses. There's nothing special about COVID. It's not this uniquely terrible virus that's causing these uniquely bad post-viral syndromes. It just happens to be one particularly relatively somewhat nasty virus, and so it tends to cause a lot of it, and especially it did at one particular point in time because a lot of people got it at the same time, so a lot of people are reporting more of that post-viral syndrome at that time, but it's not any different from any other virus if that same thing happened. If somehow like the flu got introduced in the population and a lot of people got the flu at the same time, they would have a lot of post-viral syndrome in the same way. But that said, there is a substantial psychosomatic component to it. So we know that if you look at people with anxiety disorders or depression before they even get COVID, they have a higher risk of having long COVID. If you look at people who are transgender, like if they're transgender, I think they have like a fourfold increased risk of having severe long COVID if they get long COVID compared to other people who get long COVID. If you so there's a sort of psychosomatic and psychological component to it. And I wonder and worry sometimes that the same sort of thing might also be the case for some vaccine injuries as well. If you're having this terrible vaccine injury or paralyzed and like you have long-term neurological damage, then probably it's not a psychosomatic disorder. But there are things called conversion disorders where people can literally have like fake seizures, for example. That's the thing I've seen myself. I've seen people have fake seizures. I've like seen it clinically. You look at their brain, you look at their electrical activity, they don't have anything going on. And once they're educated, some of them can stop having these fake seizures like suddenly. And so some vaccine injuries are probably caused by some degree of psychosomatic. It's like that for any sort of illness that's like non-specific. There's always some people who are psychosomatic. But what we see in this data very clearly is that uh, these vaccine injuries are real. Like it shows very clearly in the data, consistently, systematically. It's not just one or two fluke cases you hear about on social media, but it's like systematically. And that's not to say I want to like downplay people reporting anecdotes. It's important to pay attention to people, but it's an interesting learning experience for me to see that the anecdotes end up matching the data, and that makes me feel good about it. My suspicion would be that, again, as I talked about earlier, it says the rate of swelling of brain and spinal cord, which is obviously a terrible thing. There's a high risk of permanent damage. It's fourfold increase compared to the base background rates in the Moderna of the first dose. I would bet that the real rate is much higher than that because people are probably going to have other explanations for things. Probably if you go to your doctor and you tell them that like you're paralyzed from something, well, they're not going to say it's the vaccine, or they might like vaccines so much they're going to kind of fight against that idea. And so probably people are discouraged from reporting some of these things. And so the real rate's probably higher than 3.78. Whereas if you look at long COVID, doctors are probably encouraged to do it, right? Like, I'm not going to be too cynical, but if you have long COVID, obviously a lot of doctors don't want to have long COVID patients, but like, if you have long COVID, you're like a patient, right? Like, you're a patient who's going to keep coming back. So, um, and they don't have an ideology against people having long COVID. There's this sort of culture of empathy within medicine because, not that empathy is bad, empathy is a great thing, but medicine has become woke, and I think there's like too much empathy. It's like excessive to the degree that it actually harms people to this degree, right? Because people can be almost encouraged to interpret their symptoms as long COVID. So there's the opposite problem for long COVID as there's for vaccine injuries. I think vaccine injuries are probably discouraged in terms of their reporting, and then long COVID is probably encouraged in terms of its reporting because of the ideology of medicine. I think that's just a fact. I can't prove that right now, but like I would be unsurprised if you could show that empirically. I wouldn't know how to construct a study to do that, but uh, but uh, but it's something that if you could construct a study, I would not be surprised if that's the case because of the reasons I just provided. And so this rate of swelling, fourfold higher rate than normal, might be substantially higher, and so that might actually uh, be consistent with what we see with those very substantial people. I mean, I know people who are very rigorous, super intellectual, super meticulous scientists who tell me over DMs that they have like multiple people in their families that had vaccine injuries from the COVID vaccine. And I know those people are legit. Those people are like legit scientists. They're very skeptical of anecdotes. They're telling me like for sure that they see this and that this is a real thing. Um, and so it may be the case that the rate of vaccine injury is just much higher than is even being reported here because it's just being discouraged in that some of the anecdotes. And I don't want to blow this too much out of proportion because you got to be careful with anecdotes too. But it may be the case that the rate at which people are having vaccine injuries and reporting vaccine injuries on, say, online is maybe more. It's the real rate is maybe a little bit more reflective of that than it is necessarily of this study. So that's a possibility. Of course, I can't like prove that, but like that, that's my suspicion based on the considerations I've just put forward. Which makes it all the more concerning that the rate of myocarditis in some countries is like 23-fold higher than the normal rate, or 24-fold. So actually, in pericarditis for the AstraZeneca third dose is like the overall rate is like 7-fold. Let's see what it is for the different countries. And then once we do that, I'll start taking comments and questions if you guys want to start talking about stuff. And again, I'm trying to stick really close to the science while also sort of straying in terms of speculation because I'm a scientist. I'm not here to like, be emotional. We're here to just like look at the hard data. So let's look and see what the pericarditis stuff says. So the AstraZeneca pericarditis third dose, they reported in, oh, it doesn't have a breakdown by country. I don't know why. There's a reason why that I don't understand why it doesn't have a breakdown per country. Okay, anyway, so With that said, if I don't know you very well, uh, like please send me a DM if you want to talk. If I know you and you respond frequently, uh, okay. How about this? Since we don't have that many people here, if you want to talk, you can talk. But like, if somebody wants to be crazy and start saying crazy stuff and abusive stuff towards me, I'm just gonna kick you out immediately, and you're never gonna come back. So as soon as I hear that, you're out. But we'll just like see how this works. And somebody like requested something, I guess, to speak, and so I'm gonna like click yes on that person. They're gonna go first. Yeah, and they seem very. I'm looking at their profile, and they seem not. I'm gonna take you off. Well, I'll keep you on, Michael. Yeah. So politically vagrant, uh, which I think that summarizes all of our feelings, or many of our feelings. It certainly summarizes mine and several people in this chat. Politically vagrant. You can unmute yourself if you want to talk.
My only question is, why do they call it long COVID instead of acute or the other one? That kind of confuses me because if you have a long sickness, it's either acute or the other one. So when they say long, like what do they mean by long? That confuses me.
Oh, sorry, I had myself muted. By the other one, you say acute, or the other one? You mean by the other one? Do you mean chronic? Is that the word you're looking for?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think the reason that they use the word, well, okay, so if they use the word chronic COVID, that would suggest a chronic infection as opposed to an acute infection. So you have like like an infection that's being maintained. So if you have chronic COVID, that means you'd have uh, like a chronic infection. But I think long COVID is distinguished from chronic or from acute COVID, which is acute COVID would be like fast COVID, and then chronic COVID would be long term. Long COVID is distinguished from both of those by the fact that long COVID is the result of a change. We could call it damage. In most cases, it is an obvious damage in some sort of system in your body. So maybe it could be your gut or your lungs. Many post-viral syndromes destroy some cells in your lungs, and a lot of the coughing and phlegm that's coming up is actually you spitting out a lot of those cells, and so your lungs have to actually regenerate, and it takes on the order of like a month or two for that to happen. And so your lung function, and you may be coughing for a substantial period of time after you've still have the sickness anymore. That's because you don't have the infection, so it's not a chronic infection, but it's still long COVID. It's like post-viral syndrome, which is the more general term, meaning you just have damage to those organs that's causing you to have long-term symptoms that may or may not resolve. In most cases, they do resolve. I think that's why they don't call it chronic, because they're trying to distinguish it from actually being an actual infection. I hope that makes sense.
It does. I just have another question. Is why would they? Okay, so it's considered long if it's periodic cough or whatever. But for instance, why wouldn't it be chronic if you got the disease and the next thing you know, you have symptoms that last more than, for instance, a year, 6 months,
Yeah,
3 months?
because you have the disease, you have the cough, say while you're infected, but the infection is cleared. So it's not chronic COVID. You just don't have COVID anymore. You just have symptoms that are due to the damage that COVID caused. That's why.
But why would they call it long? That's my thing. Like, why would they call it long, and why would they make a new um term where no one anybody that's been through the medical industry, especially in the United States, like we never heard, oh, you have long influenza, you have long, like bronchitis. We never heard that term until now. That kind of freaks me out.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. New diseases and new disease categories can come into being by virtue of sort of political and cultural factors that have nothing to do with the disease themselves. So a really good example of this, there's several examples. Well, I'll start with the less controversial examples and move to the super controversial examples, which are also true, regardless of whether they're controversial. But the relatively uncontroversial examples are like multiple personality disorder. Uh, there was no such thing as multiple personality disorder, I think, before like the 1980s. Like that didn't exist as a clinical phenomenon. You don't find much or any of it in the literature. And suddenly in the 1980s, you had this explosion of multiple personality disorder. What happened? So people started to become aware and write up and think about multiple personality disorder. Whenever they talk to patients who had like maybe rapid changes in their states and their ways of thinking and feeling about things, um, and they're almost like different people from one moment or from one day to the next, they started being encouraged to see this problem as potentially being due to their having multiple personalities. Once they started being encouraged to experience this problem as having almost like multiple personalities, they started to experience their state changes in terms of having multiple personalities. They started to interpret their experience in that way. And then so the sort of concepts of the clinical phenomenon shaped the actual clinical phenomenon itself. They actually shaped the patient and the way the patient experienced their own symptoms, and how they thought about their own symptoms and how they experienced them. So that's one really good example. Another one is anorexia nervosa. I think there was a period of time where I can't remember the exact details, but a famous person said that I have anorexia, or no, it's bulimia nervosa. It's bulimia. I binge and purge. I can't remember who it was, and I'm too young to know that. But there apparently also in recent history there was a big actress who started talking about this, and then suddenly like it became an epidemic among young girls to binge and purge because they got the idea there's one particular approach to weight management that they could take, whether or not it was pathological, right? So then you suddenly have this flourishing of pathology related to this cultural moment of this particular celebrity saying it. Another great example is social contagion with regard to transgenderism, especially among young girls, right? There's a whole bunch of literature about that. And at some point that will no longer be controversial, and we'll be able to talk about that as if it was something in the past. Currently, it's controversial because it's intersecting with politics, and so it's taboo. I can say it because I'm canceled. Like I'm allowed to say whatever. But so yeah, those are some examples. But here, let's get to long COVID. So it's a very common thing that sort of political and cultural forces can bring something into being. Transgenderism is a great example of the political aspect. Now, for long COVID, um, one of the things is we had all this fear about COVID that was fake, right? COVID was a disease that kills people for sure. It killed in the United States between 0.5 and 0.7% of the people it affected. And maybe that's a little bit conservative. So 0.5 to 0.7%, so 1 out of 200 or so. And if you're really young, it's almost virtually harmless, essentially, unless you have other comorbidities, et cetera. Uh, but on average, taking everybody, older people, younger people, all together in the United States, 0.5, 0.6% of the population died from COVID. But when it was originally reported, it was like 5% are dying, right? It was like 3.4. In March of 2020, the World Health Organization, even though it knew better than this, it said that the rate of death from COVID is 3.4%. And then, Trump went on air after talking to a bunch of scientists, because of course he's surrounded by the best scientists in the world. He has access to everybody he wanted to. He went on the air and he said, I have a hunch. And he said it in a particular colloquial and lay person kind of way. I have a hunch, based on my talking to scientists, that the rate of death is a fraction of 1%, right? He got jumped on by the media. They said he was wrong because the World Health Organization spread misinformation about the real death rate. And at the same time, the scientists who are writing, including Fauci, right? Fauci in February of 2020, February 28th, 2020, wrote that it could be about 5% or less, or sorry, 0.5% the death rate from COVID. And so we had this really overhyped version based on I don't want to get into why that hysteria was caused, why sort of the professional managerial class, why public health, why the media, why academia scientists who are speaking in the public limelight, why they wanted to amplify the risk above what the data actually said at the time. I don't want to get into that political topic, for whatever reason they did that systematically, right? And then so when people started to realize that COVID wasn't as deadly as they thought, or maybe it was becoming less deadly, whatever, people started to realize COVID's not so much of a big deal. Long COVID sort of took its place, and I think maybe part of the reason that that's the case is because we have just sort of a general, sort of generalized sense of anxiety that's currently going on in our society, but it was especially the case in 2020, 2021. It may be worse right now. I wouldn't be surprised if it's worse right now. Um, so that people are just kind of like trying to find things to be afraid of, and I think also safetyism itself, like being afraid of my daughters are coming in because they just took a bath, so they're I'm being slightly interrupted, but it should be okay. Safety, like there's a sort of a tendency to over exaggerate threat, right? And so people wanted to keep kind of, for whatever reason, hold on to that threat of COVID, and one way to do that is with long COVID. And so COVID happened all at once. It hit a bunch of people at once. So of course it's going to create a
Kevin,
bunch of. Sorry, did somebody interrupt?
no, yeah, that's me. I'm sorry, but do you understand? Like,
Yeah. I'm trying to get to the point. I'm sorry.
no,
I'm a
you
little
got to the
long-winded.
point,
Yeah.
100%. Totally understand what you're saying. My
Yeah.
problem is the whole narrative that there's a long COVID. I'm sorry, you either have acute COVID or you have a systematic disease that actually is going to affect you for the rest of your life,
Yeah.
right?
Well, so
So
long COVID does resolve.
when people
Yep.
say that you have long COVID, that means you have a disease that you have to treat for the rest of your life
Some
because
people
it's
might,
long,
yeah, some
right?
people might say that. Those people are crazy because that's not what the data say.
Okay,
But
so what
again,
is long
yeah,
COVID though? So
long
here's the
COVID, yeah,
problem.
long COVID,
So
like
you either
again,
have acute COVID or you have
it,
scientifically do not have long. There's no scientific disease that they have long. You don't have long AIDS. You don't have long cystic fibrosis. You don't have long nothing. So all of a sudden, this word long comes into play. Why? What
cultural
other
and political.
disease has a long? Just tell me, what other disease has long?
Look, cultural and political and social factors create new disease categories all the time.
No,
Uh,
no. My problem is this.
yeah.
There's not another disease that has a long before it.
No. But
So,
there is for no,
uh,
but it has been shown. It's been known for decades, if not centuries, that there are post-viral syndromes. You can have after getting the flu. So if you have a bad case of flu, you're older, you get hospitalized, or you're very young. You can have a bad case of the flu where you have symptoms that linger for a really long period of time after. That's a post-viral syndrome, and
so
that's
why don't they call it post? Why don't they call it post COVID? Or
because there's a politics around COVID that COVID is somehow unique and special, and so the category of long COVID. And you have a good point. The category of
that's
long
that's
COVID
all I'm
the
that's all
category of
I'm
long
coming to.
COVID was created to sort of emphasize and to maintain this ideology, which is false. It's not true according to what the evidence says that COVID is somehow a unique virus that uniquely causes this post-viral syndrome. It does not. The post-viral syndrome is proportionate to the severity of the illness on average, meaning it's not different from any other post-viral syndrome, but because in the popular consciousness, because of part of our culture, COVID is such a big deal, we gave a special name to this specific instantiation of a post-viral syndrome that's really not special for COVID. And I agree with your point in that
Exactly.
sense.
That's all I
Yeah.
wanted to get to. I 100% agree with everything you said. It's just when we start using those terms, it kind of freaks me out. Like, okay, I don't have long flu. I've never had long AIDS. I've never had long uh, anything else. Like, once you put a new name to something, it makes it extraordinary, and that's what
That's what
freaks me out.
that's what
You
they're
know?
trying to do. Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with you. That's what they
And
want to do that. Yeah. That's what they're
yeah,
trying to do.
and I think everybody here should absolutely see once they put a new name to a medical term like long, like there's nothing. I don't have long asthma. I have asthma.
Yep.
You know, I don't have long COVID. I had COVID. I don't have long cystic fibrosis or whatever the fuck it is. just freaks me out once they start putting a new term to something and everybody just jumps onto it. So, the next time you get sick and they say, hey, you have long flu, just remember that does not make any sense in the DSM. They never had it in a DSM until a couple years ago.
I will be fair though that there is a post-viral syndrome and that is real. There is an interaction with people who have psychological disorders who have worse versions of it. But there is a real such
Well,
thing
then
as a post.
you call it post, Kevin, right?
Yeah,
You call it by the
we could
medical
call
term.
we should call it that to be technically accurate. We shouldn't call it long COVID to
Absolutely.
make it a big scary entity. I agree with you. It's it's this combination of grift from the scientific establishment who wants their grant money, from pharmaceutical companies, from doctors, combined with our over empathization that's currently predominant in our culture. That's sort of the dominant ideology of like being so concerned and caring about everybody's suffering that we're going to make new disease entities so that we can then treat them. And so all the different sort of stakeholders, whether they're ideological or pharmacological or medical, are all getting together in some sense to conspire to create this. Not consciously, they didn't get together in a room together, but they see the opportunity and they're all agreeing we want to keep promoting this concept of long COVID. And so I agree with you 100%. I think and not only is it's harmful, right? It's harmful. It encourages illness and encourages people to experience their existence in terms of fragility, in terms of their lack of resilience, in terms of being a victim and a chronic patient. And I don't think that's healthy. Now, we should validate people's feelings. So if people have true post-viral syndrome, and people do, I have known people who do, we shouldn't like pretend that doesn't exist, but we should also not coddle people as much as we do in our society. And I think we definitely over coddle people in a way that is going to produce more illness and sickness and more dependence. And I think it's a sickness not just in the post-viral syndrome, but a sickness in our society, which is making the actual sickness worse. How's that for a rant?
Beautiful. If they actually called it post-viral COVID, that would make all the sense in the world, right? Not long COVID. Listen, you get COVID, it goes down. You might get more symptoms within the next 3, 6, 9 months, a year. It doesn't matter, but don't call it long. That's not a medical term I've ever heard in my life. Kevin, you're a medical guy, right?
Yes.
So would you ever call like long AIDS, long HIV? Would you ever call anything like that? No.
Right.
You say,
Right. Right.
right. So when the media picks up on a word, all of a sudden we have the medical institutions picking up on the same exact thing, long. So that's what they're stuck with.
They're all
Long.
working together. They're all working together in their own mutual interest to break news stories, to scare people, to find new patients, to get more grant money, to show your empathy towards the victimized. Everybody's working together to create the category of long COVID. So,
Yeah. So just for instance, I have asthma. Is it long asthma
yeah,
or is
yeah,
it chronic?
I hear you. I
I'm
hear you.
just
So
saying, like, is it
I
is it
agree with you.
long asthma
Yeah,
or is it chronic?
I agree with you. I'm going to move on to the next speaker, though. Thank you so
All
much.
right,
All right.
have a good one,
So,
buddy.
all right, thank you. I'm going to move down the list. I don't know who raised their hand first. Um, so I'm going to just move down the list. I'm going to notice who's actually raised their hand. I'm going to make sure, since there's 3 people right now, I'm going to make sure the next 2 people are the ones that are currently on the list. But I'm going to move down the list as it's showing to me right now. And hopefully I don't get too out of order. So I'm going to start with incontinent philosophy. Yeah.
Talked before. Big fan of yours.
Thank you.
I actually put a link in answering the other guy's question that long COVID was coined by a British archaeologist girl on Twitter in
Hmm.
May of 2020.
Oh,
And
interesting.
the British medical journal, the BMJ, was promoting that the government and the rest of medical institutions should use this term
Oh my gosh.
because it, despite the fact that they claimed that probably the more accurate term would be post-acute COVID syndrome,
Okay.
which is
Yeah.
what they would have previously called it.
Yeah.
And their statement was that this, quote, mild disease is not actually mild, was one of the reasons they gave.
Right. Right.
So it confirms everything that you said.
Right. Yeah. They're trying to scare
Yeah.
everybody. That's what we all did. You know, I was doing that in 2020 before I changed my views about this. You know, I was showing my empathy. We have to show our empathy. You know, it's sick. It's really sick, and I don't think people who do this stuff really understand how sick that is. Um, Empathy's good, right? Validating people's pain is good, and I try to do that with my children whenever they're, you know, in genuine pain. But I just had my daughter today. She got the wrong stuffed animal. She didn't. She wanted another stuffed animal. She's 9 years
Oh,
old.
yeah. Yep.
But she's nine. She's nine, so she should like. That's too old to throw a temper tantrum. If she's 3 or 4, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But she's 9 and she threw a temper tantrum about it. So I said, you know what? This is unreasonable. Get in your room. I want to validate your feelings, right? But then this is an inappropriate response, and so it's okay to feel sad and disappointed that you got the wrong thing, but it's not okay to throw a fit and do this to everybody else. And you so stay there by yourself and quietly learn how to control your emotions because it's not appropriate. And of course, if she couldn't learn how to do that properly, if she still was struggling and she kept having issues, then we could sit down and have a longer talk and try to help her regulate a little bit better. But at some point, certain kinds of emotional expressions or certain kind of expressions of pain are excessive. And if you kind of validate them beyond what is appropriate, you can actually generate sort of the habit of expressing excessive suffering too much and thereby experiencing it too much. So it becomes an illness that we're creating by validating it. So I was trying not to do that with my daughter. I was trying to teach my daughter to be resilient. So anyway, that's my rant.
I think it's more that you teach these people that they can easily emotionally manipulate others.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well,
That's
yes,
the main
exactly.
problem with the over empathizing, that people are being emotionally manipulated.
Well, it goes both ways. Whenever
Yeah.
you learn to emotionally manipulate others, it also changes your own. It depends on
Ah.
the sort of dysfunction, but it can also change your own experience of your own emotions. And you can't distinguish between um, you're not consciously manipulating other people, but you're excessively experiencing your emotions as excessively uh, intense because you're being rewarded for expressing them that way, right?
You Eugipius, I'm not sure if you probably heard of him. One of his points was that he, in all of his time examining the long COVID people on Twitter, he noticed that there's this strong parallel between long COVID now, and we're talking about like 2023 and 2024, the people who still don't bang on about long COVID. There's a parallel between them and the trans community, that their
Yes.
primary function, their primary goal is recognition as a sick person.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they're not getting full recognition as much as they'd like, because there are lots of doctors who don't quite take it seriously. Or
Right.
at
I
least
mean,
that's their complaint.
yeah. I mean, well, you can get attention that way, and getting
Yeah.
attention feels good because you get recognition from other humans. And so, some people, um, I think everybody's this way to some extent. We all want recognition, and so if we experience pain and we get recognition for our pain, that's makes us feel good. Like we're being, it's like so. Yeah. There's and then you can get a whole illness
Again,
sickness
hold on.
industry based on that.
Okay.
And
Hmm?
another example. So I got kicked out of med school a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah,
two
heard
ways
that.
that I
Horrible.
there's two ways that I can experience that. One is I can be depressed and be like, my life is shit, and I can say like I feel worse than I felt 6 months ago because obviously I have to figure out like how I'm going to fix this situation, and
Mm.
I'm not going to be able to be the thing that I want to be as soon as I wanted to be it. And so
Yep.
I'm in a bad situation. So one thing I can
Yep.
do is I can focus on that and I can think, woe is me, like this is terrible. I can call people up and complain about it and be like, woe is me, this is terrible. And honestly, if I do that, which I was doing for a period of time, I make it worse. Actually, like
Yeah.
legitimately get worse. And if people like readily pick up the phone to talk to me and like, oh, like, you know, and readily
Yeah.
like, you know,
You're
I'm not
you're
the
you're
kind of
wallowing in self-pity.
100%. I'm not the kind of person who can do that for too long because
Yeah.
it gets too painful for me. But
Hmm.
I can imagine, uh, there could be ways, types of people who might be able to do that for such a substantial period of time, especially if they're getting attention and they're not getting attention for much else. Um, and so, but for me, but then I decided because I can't keep doing this, I decided, you know, I have to work through my stuff also, but I also can't wallow in it. And so, to some degree, you have to kind of push and kind of ignore it sometimes because you have to get your stuff done, and you can't wallow and identify as like a victimized person because if you do that, you actually make it worse, right? If you do that, you make your symptoms worse. And I think what we're doing as a society, our ideology is doing this. It's causing people to experience their suffering in a more intense way,
Mm.
rather than teaching people
Resilience.
exactly
Yeah.
resilience, like
Yeah.
learning how to manage those intense emotions. Because life throws all sorts of suffering at everybody, right?
Yeah.
We all go through bad periods. Learning how to manage that and deal with it and continue moving on is like one of the most beautiful gifts somebody could give to us. But we're giving people a curse. We're giving people the opposite. We're telling them your pain is important. We're going to keep validating and feeling sorry for you so that instead of learning, and we're not going to be mean about it. We're not going to be mean and sort of force you to like face it and like get yourself together. And that's too right wing. That's such a right wing thing to do to people. We're not going to do that because we're not right wing. We're going to like have empathy for you, poor person, and like let you wallow in this illness state,
Mm.
because that makes us good people. It makes me a good
Yeah.
person
That's true.
for me to validate your illness state and like
You're
perpetuate your illness
you
state.
care.
I
You're compassionate. Yeah.
I get to be a permanent savior of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm now your permanent savior. What a great thing for me. Am I not virtuous for being this person's permanent savior? And that's sick as hell. But that is the way a lot of people are orienting themselves towards pathological people in our society. And some of that happens to manifest in the form, as you said, of long COVID and of transgenderism. And I think that's very unhealthy. There is, of course, a place for empathy, but it needs to be circumscribed and
Y-
and and there actually Jordan Peterson recently
Yeah.
he responded to one of my tweets about this. Um,
Oh.
yes, he did. It was awesome. I love when
Yeah. That's
Jordan
amazing.
responds to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
It's
um,
like when I get my stuff shared by Jay Bhattacharya,
yeah, exactly.
and I think you shared some of my stuff. It's like, ooh.
It makes your day. It makes your day.
Yeah.
Um, fr-
Yeah. Hold on. Yeah, I've derailed you a bit.
yeah, I know
Jordan
I'm
Peterson
easy to
shared
be
your
derailed. Yeah,
thing that you put up. What? That's what you're on.
I'm trying to find it.
Um.
Yeah. I said all virtues can become vices when applied inappropriately.
Yes.
This is the case with empathy in the West. Empathy, a virtue, has become a vice, and it is
Yeah.
destroying civilization. To save civilization, we need to rediscover the appropriate place for empathy in our society. And then Jordan said, he, I, he's so great. I love all of his tweets. He quote tweeted to me. He said, "Sympathy is for the elderly, infants, and those who are truly ill." Okay, that's a really important,
Yeah.
meaningful
Cool.
qualifier. Those who are truly ill, and then, but he says, even then, it must be leavened by encouragement, which is exactly what I'm saying. It's almost like right wing to say, "Oh, but you need to get yourself together." No, it's encouragement. Like you can get out of this. You can do this. It must be leavened by encouragement and never weaponized by the narcissistic and psychopathic.
Why?
And
Oh, excuse me. Why is anything that's encouragement towards oneself right wing? I don't understand that.
Uh, don't
don't get me
don't try and
started.
find reason in it. The left and right's inverting. They've gone upside down, especially in the US. Um,
It's insane. It's
yeah,
insane
yeah, yeah. I'll say
yeah.
like the left is the new right, but like yeah. Um, especially when you see what lockdowns did to the poor and inequality. Um,
So yeah, so we have a sick society where we're creating an industry of people who are victims who we can then become virtuous by championing their pain. And yeah, I could go off. I
I
could talk
don't
about
think I
vaccine.
think that
Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
I think though that but the left has always had a tendency to
Oh yeah,
always presume the moral purity of the oppressed and the victims. And all that's happened since 2013 is that a group of people have figured out how to manipulate that for their own
I
ends.
I am a former leftist,
Well, yeah,
lifelong former leftist,
yes,
and
same camp.
I agree with that, and it's a good honest. And so I struggle a little bit with this because I think it's a good thing to. I think it's
Yeah, it's
even a
good, isn't it?
Christian value. It's a
Yeah,
Christian
it's
value.
really good value, right? But the problem is the world doesn't work like that. Victims are not necessarily morally pure.
Yes,
They're not necessarily
a
right. It's a bad
hundred
assumption.
percent. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. And it must be leavened by encouragement. So,
yeah.
um, victims who are they're not always morally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So
It's a
I think
cry bullies. Yeah.
leftism today is taking victimhood and making it almost the sole virtue, right? That becomes the issue. That's the sole virtue, and helping the victimized is the sole. The virtuous person is virtuous by virtue of solely that helping the
Yeah, yeah,
victimized.
that's right.
Whereas
Yeah.
the virtues that make a good person are quite diverse and complex, and you need all of them to be a truly virtuous person, at least in the classical sense, from Greek philosophy, and I'm sure
No, I
through
think I
Christian
think you're too
philosophy.
nice. I think you're way too nice. I just think they're crazy. And they have no responsibilities. If you
But
had
that's
responsibilities, guess what happens? When you actually have to deal with shit that comes towards your way, you don't have a choice. These
I
people
don't.
have
Yes,
choices.
yeah,
The choice is,
they're
hey, I'm a
yeah,
victim or
yeah,
I'm going to be a martyr.
yeah.
They have two choices.
We
I
have an
don't have any
affluent.
But
choice.
Yeah, we have an affluent society which can breed this sort of underclass of victims who can, by their own choice, play this role of victim because they don't have anything better to do because we have so much affluence. I think there's certainly something
but
to
that
that.
but that's
So I
common to
actually,
when you. Oh,
you
sorry.
know, it's funny. I actually went through their kind of like their like strategy of how you could consider yourself a victim, right? I grew up in Chicago. I was the only white person in Chicago in my area. Went to a school predominantly black, Arabian, and Mexican. Dealt with it, right? So the funny thing was, I never considered myself a victim. I had family. My family was immigrants, but it was funny because when it came to classifying, I was automatically put into a weird cosm of, hey, you are the oppressor. I'm like, dude, my parents are not from here. They're Polish and Scottish. Like, I
Yeah.
am not from here. Like,
Yep.
I don't, I don't know
But
what
you're
you're,
white though. You're white because you're a white male.
no, I'm
That
Yep.
doesn't
Slavic.
matter.
I'm not
That
white.
doesn't. That doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't matter, bro.
Doesn't
You're a white
matter.
male. You're
Right.
not allowed to
It's
be
not for you to
a
judge.
victim.
It's for them.
So just from that, I actually dropped out of high school in the ninth grade. So I walked into my high school and I had my belt on. It had a metal clasp. Right away, where I was in Chicago, that was deemed as me holding a weapon. My belt, just a belt, my pants up, and I watched everybody else go through. I'm like, okay, something's wrong with this system. It's not. I mean, this was 20 years ago, guys. So you gotta understand what is going on now. It's not simply, oh, yeah, this just popped up out of nowhere. No, this has been breeding,
Yes.
festering for so long, and now everybody's pissed off. Like, hey, well, I never saw this. Well, you guys are all suburbanites. Like, dude,
Okay.
no.
Well, I was a leftist in the past. Okay,
Oh yeah.
to me it was invisible because I
Oh,
was a part of the
I was a bigger leftist than you. I said,
problem.
fuck everything.
I think that all of us are actually still leftists. It's just that the left
That's
has
hilarious.
gone nuts.
That's
And
hilarious.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that.
Um,
I'm
right,
cool.
if there's no other comments, or I'm going to go into the next one, if that's okay.
Have
um,
fun.
I was actually going to talk about the vaccine. That's the thing, though. But it's kind of we got a bit derailed on a quick side comment. Hello.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself.
Oh,
Yeah, go for it.
um, yeah. Okay. So yeah, I wanted to get the topic back onto vaccines because that's what this is about. Um, so in Australia, there was a scare in early 2021 about the AstraZeneca vaccine causing deep vein thrombosis. And that was propagated by the press, and then they got in huge trouble for it because it caused huge wave of vaccine hesitancy, and no one wanted that vaccine. They all waited for Pfizer, and
Yeah,
that was the problem. It was a huge problem for the government because the government had only brought AstraZeneca.
yeah,
Now, I was pissed off about the scare because I thought that these vaccines were way safer than they were supposed to be. I went and got AstraZeneca and ended up having like basically IBS symptoms for 9 months. And everyone else I know had similar things. And none of what I had, I ever reported. I don't know of anyone else that I know ever reporting it.
yeah.
And so,
I didn't report my pericarditis. Yep.
so when you say that there's all of these like, what I had was not a terrible symptom, right? Like, is it even worth reporting? It makes me worried that we can't trust any of the data that we have because it's just, well, how much is going unreported? We don't even know what's going on.
Yeah,
Um,
it's definitely underreported. I think the data we have indicates that there's a problem, but it could be underreported by a magnitude. Were you here early on, whenever I was going through the paper?
yeah, I think I came in a little bit late through it, but
So,
you were in the
so,
middle of it.
so, yeah, there's a wide variation in the incidence of myocarditis in response to certain. I think let me look at the figure. There's a supplementary table that was very interesting. Oh yeah, second dose of the Moderna vaccine, the overall rate of myocarditis above the background rate is about six-fold higher. But
Mhm.
if you look at different locations, like Australia and Victoria, Australia, it's like 24 times higher.
Yep.
In France, it's like four times higher. So that may be simply the result of differences in what reporting, right? So there may be
Yeah.
cultural differences that cause that, and so there may be as much as like a tenfold difference between the reported uh, rate of any of these given symptoms and the actual rate. People just may not report it. Like they may get a blood clot in their hand and their hand goes numb, but they just don't report it.
That's
So
plausible. In America, because of the high cost of medical care, people just
yes, 100%.
tune out. In Australia, people are super sensitive.
Yes, it seems that way. And so yeah, in
Um,
Australia you have the highest rates both in New South Wales and in Victoria, the highest rates of myocarditis of anybody. I wonder if that's the same for all of the adverse effects. That's an interesting point. And it seems to be the case. That's fascinating. It seems to be the case that Australians
mhm.
have the highest rates of most of the adverse effects compared to everybody
I
else, which is consistent with what you just said. Yep.
yeah, I actually know someone who got it. So he's about 20.
No, I got
So
pericarditis. I got
yeah.
pericarditis. I went to the hospital. I thought I was going to die.
Mm,
Yep.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So yeah, it makes me wonder. I have lost any much of my ability to actually trust the modern scientific processes because every single paper is riddled with so many flaws that and they're so different from one another in their results that it's like, okay. And then the data that they get, like, it's no wonder. Um,
I think this paper is fair. If you read this paper, you read in the
okay.
limitation section, it acknowledges the underreporting problem, and it's very clear that these numbers are underestimates. I think the bigger issue is sort of the media and the public officials, the bureaucrats of science, who then
Hmm.
take all of this and then politicize it. So what they'll do is, and what they've done with this particular paper is they've been like, well, these rates are really rare. So because these rates are really, it's not a concern. But they don't take into account, right? They don't take into account the underreporting problem. even though that's clearly stated in the paper, it's an obvious thing that anybody who thinks for a day about this paper comes to understand, because I've literally only gone through this paper a day. You've gone through this paper a day. But yet nonetheless, these public officials are like, well, it's a rare thing. That's not actually what this paper says. This paper says that it could be much more common, but it is a signal that actually
what's the
exists.
roughly the rate that they're saying?
For which
Like
one?
what let's say
Myocarditis?
Pfizer. Yeah, myocarditis. Yeah, was it 1 in 1,000 or?
Okay, this is above okay, well, that's other papers. I don't
Yep.
know where in this paper they're going to talk about the actual rate. They're just talking about how much more than the background rate.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Most
The increase. Yep.
so it depends on what paper you want to look at. That's going to tell you the myocarditis rate. But if you want to look at, like, say, young men for myocarditis, it's anywhere between like 1 in 1,000 to 1 in like 5,000 at most. I would say it's probably closer to 1 in 1,000, 1 in 3,000. I think that's
Hmm.
probably where it's going to end up. Although, but then that could be way underreported for the same reasons we've been talking about. You could have mild, oh, I'm having some slight chest pains. I have a little bit of chest pain twice when I'm eating dinner, and I forget about it. That could happen all the time, and just like, that's myocarditis, but it's not, like, the symptoms aren't that
Okay.
bad, and so that
So
never
that
gets
in order
reported
to solve
ever.
that, they would have to take a large sample of the population and test for it explicitly, right?
They've done that in a Thai population. They did that in some adolescents in Thailand, where they took several hundred, and then um, they gave the vaccine, and they did serial troponin. So they're looking at the byproduct of the breakdown of the muscle cells in the heart and how it
Hmm.
goes into the blood. And they were
Hmm.
looking at elevated troponin levels, and they're also looking at different characteristics, EKG, echo, to determine whether they're subclinical. And I can't remember. I think it was 7 out of every 300 had subclinical myocarditis, so something like 2%, which is like really crazy high number. Like 1 out of 50 had at least subclinical myocarditis. I think one of those had clinical, so that was like 1 out of 300. So that was a crazy study, because once you do exactly what you're saying that you should do to really detect all that subclinical myocarditis, it's pretty high. There's a lot of it. It's like 1 out of 50. So if you're giving everybody that vaccine to prevent COVID, and it doesn't really, like, even help them, because they're like kids, and so they're not going to ever have serious COVID unless they have like a weird genetic disorder. If you're doing that, then you're just causing harm. You're not causing
Hmm.
almost any
Yep.
benefit, which is what we
Yep.
did as a society.
Yep.
That's what we did to our kids. So,
Yep. That's Vinod Prasad's point.
yep.
Just pointlessly harm people. Anyway, I don't want to
Well, no, it's not
monopolize.
pointless. It makes
Oh,
money for the
yeah.
shareholders. There's a good purpose to it. It's good. It's good. It's for a good cause, man. Come on, you got to make the shareholders their money.
I don't want to monopolize. So one little quick thing. But the thing that you said before, when the World Health Organization said it was 3%, and then Trump said that it was below 1%.
Yes.
Um, you are aware that that was the confusion between case fatality rate and infection fatality rate.
Yes, but
Yeah.
but the World Health Organization was pretending that was the mortality rate, and I don't think people
Uh,
understood that nuance. So they're saying this is how many people didn't
oh,
understand
they
that
wouldn't have known it
nuance.
at all. But
And
I know
and
there are PhD epidemiologists like Raina McIntyre in Australia who were making estimates to the press of how many people would die by simply saying 50% of the population of Australia multiplied by 3.
right,
And she's a PhD epidemiologist.
right,
And I'm like,
right.
is qualification worth anything these days? Because even Neil Ferguson used the infection fatality rate of 0.9, which was still too high.
A little bit too high. Um, um, yeah. I I think the people who spoke to the press were the biggest assholes, honestly. I think the real scientists who were talking about this behind closed doors and actually being honest, they understood what was going on. But it's a weird thing. If you have the motivation to be a public facing figure, you also tend to have the motivation to say what people want to hear. And at the time, people wanted to hear that this was the craziest virus and it's going to kill us all. And so those people gave people what they wanted to hear,
And I
because
think
those
it's,
the
I think it's
people.
more that the people who are crazy are the ones who are pushed to the top because they're saying the most sensational, outrageous things that the press like.
Yeah.
Whereas all the people who give conservative estimates are boring, not publishing you.
Right.
Like
Right.
all
Yeah.
the people in Australia who made extravagant predictions, you go to their Twitter accounts and you find out they're a lunatic.
Right.
Right? Like they're the sort of people who wear gas masks in public. Right? Like
Right.
Raina
Yep.
McIntyre is literally a picture of her with a respirator on the train.
All right. I'm gonna get to the next person
Yeah,
now.
you go to the next person.
I appreciate
Yeah.
you.
Yep. Same.
We're gonna go to Mike, and then after that, Magnificent. If I know how to operate this. So Mike can now speak.
Hello.
Can you mute incontinent?
Oh, sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Hello, Doc. How are you?
Mike, you're up.
How you doing?
Doing good.
Um,
How are you?
Good, thanks. So, there's this crazy dialect going on that because, like, I didn't take the mRNA COVID jab. I'm anti-vax. I don't know how it got so crazy. I've taken all the vaccines. I took the shingle shot 4 years ago, so I just want to dispense with that notion. I didn't take the COVID vaccine. To me, it was an easy call given I'm not a doctor, but the clinical trial data was weak. It was rushed. Corners were cut. But this is my essential question. So I had COVID in December of 2021. I'm guessing it was Omicron. Can't be sure. It was moderate, mild to moderate. Cleared it in 5 or 6 days. No problem since. And I have natural immunity. What I don't understand is why the medical. I mean, I think it's for political reasons, but why so many doctors, certainly in various spaces and on Twitter and even in the mainstream media, doesn't think that natural immunity is superior to COVID jab immunity. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong. I mean, first of all, the vaccine is only as good as your immune system, right? And the natural immunity, tell me again if this is correct, doesn't it give you a comprehensive, your body, your T cell, your B cell memory is going to remember all the proteins of the virus and not just the spike protein. That's why they keep having to boost every 6 months or every year because the virus mutates and you know you don't have the same kind of memory. I just don't get it. I just feel that if you've got natural immunity, you're good. I'm not saying I won't get it again, but I think it would be again a mild case. I'm just curious on your comments about this whole dichotomy. There are these kind of two camps that just won't give natural immunity, you know, any of the credit.
I think it's now well accepted by everybody, and it's no longer controversial at all that natural immunity is at least as good as vaccine immunity and probably significantly better. It lasts longer. It probably is superior as well. But early on in the pandemic, so there's multiple answers. It depends on who it is communicating the message that natural immunity sucks and that vaccine immunity is good. I would say the sort of charitable view, and I think a lot of people, again, I think it's very important to emphasize that most of the people who are promoting false messages are doing them do making doing promoting these false messages with good intentions, because most people aren't psychopaths. I would say uh, if you think most people are psychopaths, then you're have issues. I think the majority of people are not psychopaths. Maybe between 1% and 5% of the population is psychopathic. Maybe a little bit more has more psychopathic traits. Maybe up to 10%. And then psychopathy is on a continuum. So, but the people at the extreme end are relatively uncommon. So most people are acting in good faith and are believing what they're seeing. So there's either the people who truly believe that, and those are the fuddy-duddies who they may actually, for their own personality disorder reasons, believe that. They may passionately want to believe it, or they just may not be particularly good at reading the scientific literature, or they just may not be critical people, so they just believe it because that's what they're told. And then there's also the people who knew that the situation could be more complex than that, and I think those people included people like Fauci, Walensky, and other folks. And so for those people, uh, of those kind of people, right? The more charitable interpretation of many of those people is that even though they knew that natural immunity may be as good as vaccine immunity, they didn't know for sure that that was the case. It wasn't yet. The evidence wasn't quite clear for them. I'm not actually an expert of what the evidence said at that exact time, early 2021. So I don't know what the evidence looks like to people who are looking at it carefully. That's a very important historical question that I need to dig into because that's deeply important for. I'm going to write part of a book chapter eventually about that particular topic. So I'll be able to have a better answer for you about that at the end of the year. But the people who weren't quite clear about it, but like we're still emphasizing the message that natural immunity is still inferior. What their intention was, and what I think a lot of public health intentions were, that allowed people to justify lying a lot and feel like they were being moral whenever they lied, was that they didn't want to encourage anybody to get infected, right? They didn't want to give anybody any grounds to believe that if they were infected, things were okay. So just get infected and get it over with, or once they're infected, it's just as good. They didn't want to like give anybody the idea that they should or could reasonably avoid the vaccine. They wanted people to really be almost scared into getting the vaccine. They wanted to lie their way to get people to do what they thought that they should do.
The thing is, though, don't they? I mean, I think you're being, to your
Now,
credit, very, very kind. But
I'm not saying these are the only motivations. I'm going down the list, and this is like
right.
this next level. And I think there's a lot of people who truly believed this way because they were scared of anti-vax and they wanted to counter anti-vax attitudes in the strongest way possible, and that included by lying about it. Okay, I really believe there's a lot of people like this, and I would probably count myself in that category at that time. Now, Fauci and Walensky, who actually maybe were around people who were talking about the literature, maybe. But I do know this as well. If you read Scott Atlas's book about the COVID task force in 2020
I did. Yeah.
and how that was put together, if you read what he says about Birx,
Yep.
Redfield, and Fauci, they weren't reading the literature critically. That wasn't the way that they were built. That wasn't the way they were trained. That wasn't the orientation that they had towards science. They sort of credulously took correlations, especially correlations that fit their ideology, and just ran with them without critically thinking. Apparently, Atlas was so annoying to all of these people in this task force because he was like one of the only real scientists who's actually trying to think about the pandemic scientifically, which just blows your mind because it's like this is the very highest level of pandemic response, and we only had one person who was thinking about it in the right way, and he was sort of outcast by virtue of the fact that he was scientific. And so there's something very pathological about that. And so as a result, all sorts of magical thinking can then operate, all sorts of ideological thinking, all sorts of loose thinking that's not based on strong data. And so you don't even necessarily need people being like, well, I know the data, but I'm making this specific calculation. You just need groupthink in those scenarios. You need groupthink, an unscientific groupthink, and people just saying this is the way that it is, and not really even thinking too carefully or deeply about things because that's not their orientation towards how to manage the pandemic. And
No,
I think there
no,
was
I
a lot
agree.
of that. I think there was a lot of that, according to Atlas. I think there was a lot of that at the top of all of the agencies, which is fucking scary. Um,
No,
uh,
you're right.
yeah.
I read the book. They clearly had a mindset,
Yeah,
but
you're a granny killing eugenicist fascist if you speak
right.
out.
And but
So yeah,
if you read the
Yeah,
book,
that's the
and
reason why people are scientific is we weren't really scientific. We are actually fascists who wants to kill people.
just
We
yeah,
were just doing it and calling it science in the name of science, but actually our real motivation was to kill everybody. Right.
yeah,
he
yeah.
points out in
Having
his
kids in
book.
school, that's in Mein Kampf, you know.
Yes, exactly. And it's not really about having kids in school, bro. It's about cleansing the human race of the weak. And we're using kids in schools as like a way to justify our secret ambitions to cleanse the human race of the weak, right? That's literally the way that they looked at us, and I'm not kidding you. That's literally the way that many of them
Yeah.
look at us. Yeah.
I actually,
Nobody.
last time we talked, I actually asked you why people like me were viewed as eugenicists because I didn't get it. And then you explained that. That was the first time anyone's ever explained it. I couldn't understand it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to be because you. Yes, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
according to, let me just say, according to Atlas in his book, and I know there are some folks in this room who are all in on the mRNA vaccine, and they don't want to hear this. But even in his book, he sat there
I
with
may have
data.
derailed you.
What's that?
You were talking about Fauci.
No, I'm
yeah.
talking
We're
about
good. We're good. We're talking about Atlas. He's talking about Atlas now.
Atlas.
Yeah,
Atlas, as Kevin pointed out, he sits there with data, and Fauci and Birx, they don't care about the data. They
yep.
just have this mindset that we're going to get everyone vaccine. We're not even going to risk stratify it. I mean, this is a guy who's on the inside, and like you said, that that is a complete, subversion of a republic. So then they go into this whole phase of mandates for people. I have kids in college. I got them out of the mandates. None of the college kids needed to be mandated for this thing. This thing was not even remotely risk stratified. And now, by virtue of this like, totalitarian view of vaccines, you've created a backlash against the good vaccines. Measles
Yes.
works,
Yes.
MMR, all those things work. But they created the backlash, in my opinion.
Yep. Oh yeah. Because if you can't trust the establishment anymore, you're going to be much more inclined to start listening to RFK. And let me tell you, RFK is not interpreting the literature correctly on a lot of issues, in my opinion. And but then you're going to go down that rabbit hole, and then you're going to start like not vaccinating. And maybe there's a conversation to be had. Okay, this is where I get like maybe it's true that our establishment is so pro-vax, right? We haven't really had these discussions the way that we should have had them in the past, and so I'm open now to that point of view, and that may or may not be true, and yeah, so it opens the door to definitely delegitimizing legitimate treatments and even potentially illegitimate treatments because we don't trust the establishment to have been telling us the truth about anything anymore.
The,
Which,
the other thing
you know,
I don't understand is, I mean, again, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I read some doctors who had a different opinion. I read Dr. Sukarit Bhakti very early on in the pandemic, and he explained how this thing worked. And he said, you just don't want to go down this road if you're healthy, if you have a couple of comorbidities and you're over 75. He said maybe, but when he explained to a layman like me how essentially, they're actually having your body manufacture the pathogen, from the coded mRNA. Just
yeah,
intuitively, I said, this is not like the flu vaccine. That's a
it's
scary
not.
proposition. And hundreds of millions of people, if they were explained that that's the mechanism of action, I don't think, I think there would have been a much greater uproar. China didn't use that technology. They're right. They used the typical, what does it use? And I think the Novavax type of vaccine. Um,
Yeah, I think they used was it
not,
adenovirus vaccine? I'm not,
or there's another one. It's
or is
more
it
of the
protein
it's the
manufactured
traditional type
protein?
of attenuated.
Yeah.
Is this AstraZeneca?
No, he's
No,
talking
no,
about
no.
The Chinese vaccine. I can't remember what it was.
Chinese. I forgot it too, but they did not use the mRNA technology.
Yeah,
It,
But still, there are people now, young folks. I mean, again, some of them are in the room. I go into these spaces and always get trashed when I just push back a little bit. And they're on 5, 6, 7 boosters. And I don't think that they have actually digested what they may be doing to their immune system. They don't believe that original antigenic sin is a thing. They don't, immune imprinting, they don't think that's a thing. They don't believe that perhaps Dr. Malone is right and the shot doesn't stay in the deltoid. There were no pharmacovigilance studies. There were no biodistribution studies. And yet still, let's take another booster. I don't get it.
yeah. Um, they're true believers, and we have a sort of religious faith on the left in the establishment and in the science, TM, and they're going to believe everything until they don't. And that's where I was. So they're not thinking critically about things. They don't think, they literally think that they can just trust other people to do it for them because those other people are acting in good faith. They're going to tell them the truth, or they're going to get pretty close. And if it wasn't the truth, then they would tell them, and it would correct. And I don't think they understand the extent to which things have been compromised.
That
So I,
their credentials are solid and that the institutions function very well. It's just an
Yes.
assumption. Naive
Yes.
credentialism.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
I'm sure the gentleman that just spoke is familiar with Senator Gerald Rennick.
I don't know who that is.
No, the other guy that was just talking is from Australia. No, the other speaker is not from Australia.
He is, but he's not talking for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. But
Oh no, there's a handful of senators. There's Rennick in Australia. There's what's his name, the guy in the UK. We've got Rand Paul. And they go before essentially empty rooms, but they talk about excess mortality. They talk about vaccine injury, and nobody wants to hear it. Anyway, I'll end with that and let other folks come up, and I appreciate the time.
yeah, thank you for talking. I'm gonna do Magnificent next. Magnificent, you can now speak.
Hello, I don't hear anyone. Am I supposed to speak?
Yeah, you can talk now.
Hey,
You're up.
hey, Kevin, I just didn't want to interrupt anyone. Um, Great points, Mike. Kevin, this is a great space. Thank you for holding it and being such a rational, kind, open person. You never know when you jump into these spaces what you're going to get,
Yep.
especially with the
Uh,
pro-vax groups. They are rabid and hostile, and often they are. And I
isn't
don't.
that Yeah, isn't that fascinating too? Though they're so empathetic. How are they
They
so?
they are amazingly horrible. So I stay out of them because I just don't waste my time on it. I've got too much to do. But anyway, I wanted to jump in as a 71-year-old immune deficient patient who has to infuse with gamma globulin every 3 weeks because my immune system is broken. And I want to tell
Mm,
you how that happened since it's
mm,
vaccine related.
mm.
Um, I am not COVID vaccine jabbed. Well, I don't want to call it a vaccine because it most definitely is not. Um, I didn't take any of the shots, and it was Dr. Judy Mikovits, PhD microbiologist, who saved me from getting the first jab. I watched Plandemic, and that was the first documentary I guess I saw that convinced me to steer clear. My husband is a retired chemist, and he told me the vaccines would not, I'll call it vaccines, but just know I don't believe it is a vaccine at all. My husband, retired chemist, said, they've been working on a coronavirus vaccine for over 40 years. They're not able to do it, they never will be. So he said, I'm not taking it. You do what you want, but I'm not going to take it. So I listened to him. And my GP, I found a wonderful doctor who is uh, believes, like I do, that the shots are dangerous for everybody, potentially everybody. And he said, you probably saved your life by not getting this because he said, my patients are having devastating results, the ones that got it. Now, not everybody, but he said a significant number are. He said, I've lost one or two. I can't remember what he told me, a couple maybe. And then the strokes and the blood clots and things like that that follow are just, off the charts. And so I want to tell you what Dr. Mikovits told me about how my immune system became broken, just to open your mind a little further to maybe accept the possibility that no vaccine is safe or effective, and no vaccine has been properly tested against a placebo, according to RFK Jr. and to Dr. Mikovits. So anyway, I'm on a Twitter space several months ago, and I'm listening to Dr. Mikovits talk, and she mentions my immune deficiency specifically, which is common variable immune deficiency. And she is responding to another doctor, and she says, common variable immune deficiency is simply a new name for a new disease that's simply a result of vaccine injury. And so I nearly spit my coffee out. I was like, what? No, that's me. So I was able to reconnect with her the next week in another Twitter space. And I got to ask her questions about that. So basically, what she told me, since I'm not COVID jabbed, I am flu jabbed. And of course, I had my childhood vaccines and whatnot. But I don't remember ever having a significant negative response to an immediate shot. But there is cumulative vaccine injury too that we must not ignore. So she said, you're most likely you are flu vaccine injured. And she went into great detail and explained how. It's a little hard for me to explain, but I'll make it real simple in case anyone can follow this. So my husband helped. We drew pictures to break it down because she's really hard to follow. She's a genius, but man, she's all over the place. So it's basically your plasmacytoid dendritic cells. So picture Cook A and Cook B. Cook B doesn't want to communicate with Cook A. And so as a result, the soup can't be made because the ingredient is not being given. So in other words, your plasmacytoid dendritic cells are not communicating, so they cannot make interferon, and then so the antibodies can't be launched either. That's at least as I understand it. So once I heard that, I was like, oh my God, it all makes sense now, because there's no genetic reason for me to have been so sick for so many years. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 62. So, and it took getting sepsis 3 times for doctors to finally take my lifelong, or at least adulthood life of being sick with chronic respiratory infections and sinus infections. Now, what turned me around was the gamma globulin infusions that I now take. You can take those IG, it's called, or you can have subcutaneous infusions, which is what I do, which means I just stick 3 needles into the fatty part of my body, and I infuse for about 2 hours. And I do it myself. So that turned me completely around. And so I didn't even get COVID until this past November. And I wasn't very sick because I was prepared. I'd done my homework. I listened to all the freedom doctors, the health freedom doctors, who said, get zinc, get your ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, budesonide, get it all on hand. And when you need it, use it. That's what I did. So I breezed right through that, even though I'm 71 and immune deficient. So all that to say, Dr. Judy Mikovits educated me on the dangers of the vaccines and how the data has been falsified. The safety data has been falsified, censored for years. All you have to do is read her. She's got 3 books out. I'm reading right now, Plague of Corruption, I think it is, and Plague and Ending Plague. She is absolutely amazing and a wealth of information. So after listening to her, reading parts of these 3 books, listening to other expert doctors who know their stuff way more than I do, I am convinced that no vaccine is safe, because no vaccine has been tested against a placebo, as far as my research takes me. And I believe the experts who have really delved into this way more than I have. So here I am coming to you as a most probably flu vaccine injured person that knows from my own life experience that that is probably the shot that has continued to injure me. Now, maybe I have an epigenetic propensity to being injured by the components in the flu vax. I don't know, but anyway, and also I wanted to answer. Let's see, what's his name? Political somebody, the guy who spoke about what long COVID is. I believe, just as a patient and a researcher, that long COVID is just a term that they're attaching to COVID vaccine injured patients. And the reason I say that is I'm in a lot of these the vaccine injured groups, like Lindsay House, the RN that was damaged by the COVID shot. I listen to a lot of these spaces and the people who are injured. And, I believe what they say. I mean, their injuries are real. But anyway, one of them, somebody in one of the groups spoke of how um, their doctor tried to get them to put long COVID to agree to that as their injury instead of vaccine injured, because what's happening is these poor people who have been injured now are being gaslit by their doctors for various reasons. Some um, are willingly ignorant. Some are in on, I think, payouts. The money looks good um, for whatever reason, but these patients aren't getting the attention they need. I mean, some are dying. They have cardiac and they have liver and heart disease as a result. They were perfectly healthy. They exercised. Their weight was good. And it was an immediate. Unlike mine is cumulative. Their injuries were immediate within days of their shots, and there are millions of people like that that are not being listened to because everybody is censored. Thank God for
Yep.
Twitter, or we wouldn't even know what's going on at this point. So, all that to say, I'll land my plane. Just be aware that, as Dr. Mikovits puts it, you need to relearn everything that you've been taught or that you think you know from the medical establishment. We're at a point where we have to question everything that we've been taught because it is so damn corrupt. And if we don't get out from under the UN and the WHO, we're really screwed because they're calling the shots in a lot of these cases. And if that treaty passes that the WHO wants passed, then there's no hope for any of us. And I mean, they can decide that climate change is a pandemic or a health emergency and mandate God knows what. So, anyway, sorry to go on so long. I have a book to write, seriously. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for coming on. I'm gonna go to the next one who there's a troll that wants to troll me now. He can do that. We'll have him on for a few minutes and then I'll kick him out if it becomes too insufferable. What's up, make lying wrong again? How's it going?
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Mm. Yes.
Okay. Um, I there were a couple things I wanted to respond to, but maybe to respect everybody's time and not hog the mic, I'll just say one thing, um, and we can discuss it if you guys want. I think there was an article posted by Nobel Prize winner Drew Weissman, and
Mm-hmm.
full disclosure, I'm not a medical expert, I'm not a doctor, so I'll defer to people who are medical experts and doctors. But in my reading of that article, um, a couple things. I guess there was an article about a study that showed the largest, a Daily Mail article, right, about largest COVID vaccine study finds shots are linked to increased risk of neurological blood and heart disorders, but they're still extremely rare, right? That's the title of that article. An important part of that article is in 13 billion doses, it says, of vaccines being administered, there have been 2,000 cases of all conditions. It also says that the researchers said they can save millions of lives, and there can also be a small number of people who've been adversely affected. And then finally it says, let's see here, what was the other important one? I'm going to paraphrase. Apologies, I won't get the exact wording right, but it says something to the effect, if you look at that Daily Mail article, that the risk of these conditions with COVID infection is much greater than the increased risk from getting vaccinated. And I think those are important caveats. And then the other article that was posted was the one by Drew Weissman, I guess from 2018, mentioning that there could be risk to mRNA vaccines when those technologies are being developed. But in fairness, maybe a question for you, Kevin, or whoever posted that, if you were to ask that guy, Dr. Weissman, today, if he thinks the vaccines are safe and effective, I mean, do you think he would say no, that the evidence doesn't support that they are? I mean, I think in fairness to the audience, we should be clear that he probably wouldn't say that, right? As far as I can tell, anyway, from just a couple of recent articles with him, but I don't know him. Any response to that?
Yeah, so I think let's start with the Drew Weissman part. I'm not really using his opinion about whether they're safe or effective. I'm just starting with the mechanistic statement that mRNA can cause blood coagulation, and using that to help explain the signal we see both in the Pfizer and Moderna trials, and or at least I think there's a signal, as it pointed out, it's not statistically significant, but it's consistent. And then you see the same thing with the uh, with the study that we're talking about currently. And so I'm just pointing out that there's data starting from the mechanistic level all the way up to the population level, and also including the RCTs that implicates mRNA vaccines in producing blood clots. And I'm not into uh, that doesn't really address whether the vaccines are safe and effective. I think safe and effective is kind of an oversimplified. I don't think I think that's kind of. I mean that's I would even say to some degree the phrase safe and effective is a political phrase rather than a scientific one. Um, Effective is a matter of degrees and safe is a matter of degrees, right? Which actually is something you pointed out. Specifically, you pointed out that these adverse events reported in these studies are still rare. And so if you compare them to the uh, postulated number of people who have been saved by the vaccines, it's still relatively few. And so the concept of risk in that case is relative, or concept of harm. And so it's the same thing is true for the concepts of safety. So it's not really a question of what he thinks, it's a question of what the data says. And I was just using his citation of some other study uh, as just a way of acknowledging and lending authority, whether or not that's a legitimate scientific move. It's a legitimate move in social media, and I believe it's also true scientifically, regardless of whether it's a legitimate move scientifically, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah,
th- th-
that does
then
make sense.
then then I was just pointing out that the creator of mRNA vaccines himself recognizes the potential for blood clots, and lo and behold, the data actually shows that. Now, whether or not those blood clots, let's get onto your other points. And I appreciate you saying these criticisms. I was very bothered by looking at your profile before I found out that you're going to control, and I appreciate you stating these criticisms very simple and scientific, so we can address them that way. Because I know you're sort of opposite end of the political spectrum, and uh, often things can become uncivil. So I appreciate that not being the case here. In this species, probably one of those as well. You understand the importance of that. So I just want to make that comment, and I'll move on to uh, the rarity. So something we addressed earlier in space, probably maybe before we came on, is
Kevin,
mhm.
can you hear me okay? Because you were breaking up a little bit, but I think I heard everything you said. You were just breaking up a little bit. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Hear me
Okay,
breaking up.
a little bit, but I can still make out what you're saying. Go ahead.
Uh, are other people seeing that I'm breaking up? Are they saying yes? Thumbs up, yes. Thumbs down if no. Breaking up, thumbs up. One person. Anybody else hear me breaking up? Thumbs up, or thumbs down if no.
That's a lot better now, for what it's worth.
It sounds good.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just where my phone was. I don't know. Okay, sorry. Phone positioning. Um, let's talk about the relative rarity or whatever of side effects. So the first thing to like realize is that when you look at different countries for say the myocarditis signal, you look at this as supplemental material, you see a really wide range in how much more myocarditis you have in say the second dose of Moderna. So this is supplementary table 9 if you want to look it up. If you don't need to, but um, the overall is a six-fold increase in myocarditis, but in Australia it's like a 24-fold increase, Victoria, Australia, and then in France it's like a four-fold increase, which is a six-fold difference between those two. Are they fundamentally biologically different in France versus Australia? Maybe it's just that people in France are not inclined to go to the doctor as much or be as health conscious, and so they're not going to report it as much. And so the question is, and this is noted in the paper itself, and this actually isn't noted in the Daily Mail um, article. I just think the Daily Mail article is very interesting as sort of a preliminary reading. In fact, but I would say I would agree with you. The Daily Mail article is a little bit more cautious about how strongly we should take these potential or these harms, right? Documented harms. But I would say that what the Daily Mail article doesn't take into account, and the commentators that it used didn't take into account, was the fact that the article itself points out that these are probably underestimates for the reasons we've been talking about. People may not report them. I never reported my pericarditis, and actually my pericarditis happened outside the period of time that this would be reported. That's because pericarditis, especially in older vaccinees, I'm in my 30s. Pericarditis in older vaccinees tends to be a little bit more delayed. It's very interesting. I don't understand exactly why. And so, uh, and then I never reported it as a vaccine injury. And so there may be many vaccine
But
injuries that are not necessarily reported. So what I think this paper establishes is that these vaccine injuries do occur, right? But
sure,
it
but
doesn't.
well,
Go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead.
Let me. Yeah, but it
Yeah, go
doesn't
ahead.
establish the rate. I think it's reasonable, and this is one of the sort of ranges that I gave, especially since again we see like a six-fold variation that may not be accounted for by um, differences in reporting. It could be something else specific to the population. There's all sorts of other statistical reasons. Just to put on my scientist hat, because I know you're a fellow scientist, so I'm pointing that out. But it could also just be legitimate variations in reporting. And so these figures could be as low as like tenfold lower than the real rate, or in addition, there could be uh, other subclinical forms that are affecting people. So I think this article establishes that these side effects exist. I don't think it strongly establishes the rate at which these side effects exist. I do think it would be unreasonable, probably, but I don't know if this is necessarily true. It'd probably be unreasonable to say that severe versions of any of these side effects are happening at 100-fold more rate than is being reported. I think that would be quite unreasonable because if they're serious, probably most of them would be reported. But I think this article opens up the possibility, keeps the possibility open of more mild versions of all of these effects being occurring at much greater rates than necessarily this article is reporting. Now, you've compared the rate of myocarditis in the vaccine compared to the rate of myocarditis from COVID. And I think actually
Right.
dementia,
That's what I was going to ask. Go ahead.
there's also in one article, I don't know if this was this article or another article, where they do dementia or they do neurological side effects, and they said it was like 100 times more neurological effects from the the COVID than the vaccine. I have some methodological questions about that, but then let's just talk about the myocarditis because I'm actually much more familiar with this part than I am with the neurological stuff, which immediately something leaps to mind there, but we could talk about that later. For the myocarditis, uh, I think that so the media did a terrible job, and they did this in 2022, 2023, where they said that, and they especially used these meta-analyses where they then reported, well, in the overall population, the rate of myocarditis from COVID is much higher than it is from the vaccine. But that was really never, in my opinion, the debate, at least among intelligent people and scientists. I think the debate really is the rate of myocarditis among young people is from the vaccine is quite much higher than the rate of myocarditis from COVID-19 among young people. Now, older people, that ends up reversing, right? The severity of COVID-19 becomes much worse than the severity of the effect of the vaccine, according to the data that we have. And so for older people, it makes a lot more sense, but for 20-year-olds, for example, who have a sensitivity very significantly higher than the COVID itself for the vaccine, it might not make sense. So the media really did a poor job on this because the whole point, the whole problem with the myocarditis story was that it happens predominantly and much more among younger people. And so it's more of an issue about age stratification, whether or not you want to give vaccines to younger people as opposed to older people. And whenever the media reported it for the whole population as a whole, in general, uh, it glossed over this problem and then suggesting that everybody should therefore get the vaccine because the rate of myocarditis for everybody from the vaccine is lower than the rate of myocarditis from COVID. But that's very misleading because that was never what the debate was about. So
Yeah.
I agree with you though. The overall point, which is that for the populations for which myocarditis and other negative long-term effects from COVID are worse than the documented rate of negative effects from the vaccine, then obviously the vaccine makes more sense than not vaccinating. So I'm not making an anti-vax argument by any means. And up
Got it.
until
Okay.
very recently, my grandmother was, much to the chagrin of probably some people in this group, and I'm just going to be honest because I can't help being honest. And also it pisses me off when people say this is wrong and like, so I'm just going to I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's right. Uh, Up until recently, my grandmother was getting her COVID vaccines regularly, including all her boosters, because she's in her 90s. And so obviously it makes a ton of sense for her. But for me, I'm not getting another booster. I got pericarditis from the vaccine, and it probably was a bad idea for me to get more than 1 or 2 doses in the first place. Maybe one dose would make the most sense for somebody like me. So, yeah, no, I think it's a more nuanced argument. So I just
Got it.
point
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
out.
That
Yeah.
I can see that. That is a very nuanced argument, right? So you're saying, okay, if you age stratify, and you're young, there is an increased risk of myocarditis from COVID infection. There may also be an increased risk from vaccine, and you're saying if you dig into those numbers, which I have not done, but maybe you have, that it's kind of a toss up or it's unclear
It's not a
what the
toss
risk
up.
benefit is.
I think it's pretty clear. Um, and in my opinion, there's several papers I can direct you to, and maybe I'll go add those to the list here in those papers at the top that have shown, at least using the data that was available at that time, and I think is still current as far as the cutting edge data. It's shown that the risk is much greater from the vaccine than it is from the virus. Now, that doesn't mean that the risk is still is great. It doesn't mean like if every person who's vaccinated, who's 20-year-old healthy male is vaccinated, they're all gonna, you know, a quarter of them are gonna get myocarditis. It's nothing like that. It's just these are all rare effects when you're talking about that age group, whether it's from the vaccine or from myocarditis. And but the rate of these rare effects is much, much, much higher from the vaccine than it is from the virus itself. And I
So
think it's clear as far as I know.
I know anecdotal evidence doesn't decide the issue, but my wife's cousin, a teenager, healthy teenager, got COVID infection, very mild infection, was unvaccinated, and got myocarditis, and wasn't a huge deal. My understanding is that most instances of myocarditis, again, I'm not a doctor, you tell me if I'm wrong, most cases of myocarditis will resolve by themselves. He had a moderate case, I guess. He had to miss a season of football, couldn't exercise, difficulty breathing, that kind of thing. That was from COVID infection, and that, to me, intuitively makes sense because the vaccine, its primary job is to spread one component of the virus. So if that can cause myocarditis, why wouldn't the entire virus, which contains that mRNA and that spike protein, potentially cause it? But you're saying that the data will support that actually in that age group, the risk is significantly higher. You're better off getting the whole virus than getting a controlled dose of the spike protein in your shoulder.
Yes, because well, so the controlled dose of the spike protein, I mean, this gets into really interesting nuances, right? The controlled dose of the spike protein is substantially more than the spike protein you'd actually get from the virus because you're going to be able to clear the virus very easily before it even becomes a significant systemic issue if you're young. And so you're actually getting a worse dose from the virus itself. So there's actually an argument, an alternative argument to what I'm saying, which would be that for maybe younger people, okay, because the response to the COVID vaccine is also age dependent. So if you're very young, you have a very strong response to the COVID vaccine, which is also why you can clear COVID easier, right? And you have a weaker response when you're much older. So one of the arguments, the potential ways of dealing with this problem, there's several, but one way is that you could have just had a lower dose for younger people. That could have, I mean, logistically that may have been a nightmare, but I mean, I guess you could have filled up the syringe halfway, right? Not, why not? But yeah. So, um, so yeah, so yeah, actually, the argument would be that you're actually getting a higher dose if you're younger from the vaccine than you would from the actual virus because of how easily and how strongly the body does react to the virus itself. Um,
So
uh, yeah, but
one
there
thing,
may
if
be
I
outliers, of course, but we're talking about an average. Hmm.
okay, and I'll shut up, by the way, at any time. I know that there's other people who probably want
No,
to
this
talk,
is
so I don't want to hog
interesting.
the mic. But maybe to be a little more like conciliatory, maybe something that we agree on. And again, I'm not a medical expert, so my opinion on vaccines isn't as relevant
No,
as
and to be
yours
clear,
or someone else's.
what I'm saying, it goes against the recommendations by these public health institutions. It's, but I will say in my favor, some of the most brilliant biomedical researchers currently working agree with me. So uh, you can weigh those opinions of some handful of very brilliant people, in my opinion, with I would say bureaucrats who want to give vaccines to everybody. Honestly, if you do give universal vaccinations as opposed to this age stratified thing, the amount of excess harm is not going to be tremendous. It's not going to be a lot. It's probably relatively small on the broad scale of things. So you can sort of therefore say, well, they're not causing a lot of harm because of this, but they are causing a little bit of excess harm that could have been avoided had they done age stratification. So, but I just want to point out that my view is at odds with the official recommendations, but I think consistent with a very intelligent take on the science. That's all.
Yeah, that's
So
a
whenever you say you're not a medical scientist, well, what I'm saying is not necessarily the sort of mainstream consensus. I think among true scientists, authentic scientists who have really thought about this and are talking in private about this, probably would many of them would agree. I'm not sure if it would be the majority. I would say that I have a good chance, but at least the public positions are not on my side.
yeah. Well, I mean that doesn't make you wrong, but it's good that you're honest and upfront about it, right? So
I agree.
the thing I wanted to ask about is the thing I was going to ask next is, you Mike, or maybe it was someone else, was saying, maybe it was you were saying that in the beginning, um, medical experts didn't want to make it seem like you should just get infected, right? So they didn't play up that, well, you could have even better immunity maybe from getting infected than from getting the vaccine. Um,
Yes.
isn't there sort of a fundamental, like, to me, that's like saying, well, to me, the immunity that you get after you get infection, it's sort of like the airbags going off after impact, right? Like you've already been, the purpose of immunity is to avoid the risk of severe illness. So if you've been infected, you already
Yes.
paid the cost of that
Yes.
risk. So sure,
Yes.
you may
Yes.
be less likely to get infected again, but the point of the vaccine is you don't bear that cost of getting severe
That's a
COVID
great
illness,
that's a great
right?
point. And so because they were also worried that people would not take that into a consideration, and they'd be like, "Oh, just natural immunity is just good." And also, there's this sort of ideology of nature. The natural way is the best way. The body knows what to do. They were worried that that sort of ideology or ideologies or beliefs that were similar to that, or at least had a similar role in making people ignore the risk of getting infected, would cause people not to get vaccinated. So you're exactly right. Um, there is that risk, and that they wanted people just not to ignore that risk. They were worried that people might do something different than what they thought they should be doing, which strongly disagree with. I think even if somebody wants to ignore that risk, they should be given the right information to make a decision for themselves about whether to ignore that risk. But that's my opinion.
I I agree. I agree with that. I would just say that, like, by the way, totally agree. People should be informed of what the risks are, and then they should make that decision with their doctor. But the original sin here, like, you mentioned Fauci, medical establishment. I think we should, like, disentangle reputable authorities in medicine and science from, like, CNN, right, or MSNBC or social media. Of
Yes,
course, the left and the right politicize everything, right? Like I wouldn't go to CNN or MSNBC, it, for factual information about much, to be honest. So I'm sure that they spun the ball in favor of the vaccine. They ignored, right, rare side effects of the vaccine, that kind of thing. But the original sin here in the politicization of this issue, which shouldn't be political, has to go back to Donald Trump, right? Because he said in the very beginning, it was very clear that he didn't like the idea that this COVID infection was going to potentially impair the economy during an election year. And he said, if you look at his statements constantly, he was saying the stock market's going to go back up and, the infections are going away. But he said to Bob Woodward in private, and we have the recording, he's like, yeah, I was trying to downplay the virus because I was worried about, it hurting the economy. That that was the thing that really made this a political thing, and it didn't have to be, right? And then what happened was, I'm curious if you agree with this, in some cases the medical establishment, experts, and then, like, left-wing media, right, like the CNNs of the world, their hackles went up, and they maybe defended the vaccine or downplayed the very rare side effects of the vaccine more than they otherwise would have, because they were reacting to this enormous politicization of COVID that really started with the president of the United States. And when the president tweets something like, "Hey, there aren't there aren't as many, these COVID deaths aren't real. The CDC, he retweets something. It's like, yeah, COVID deaths aren't as big as the CDC says they are. That's something where like a very small number of Americans may have believed that if it hadn't been for that. But when the president tweets it, it goes out to millions of people, and all of a sudden it gets this currency where people think, it's bullshit, right? People aren't really dying of COVID. The president of the United States has the best information. So if he's saying it, it must be true. And that feeling that COVID isn't like really that serious, I think politicized it, created boundaries. And yes, you're right. I think you guys alluded to this. There are probably many instances where the medical establishment and the CNNs of the world, right, reacted to that, and they overreacted sometimes, right? They should have just been honest and been straight down the middle and said, yep, these are the side effects. This is how common they are. And maybe they didn't always do that. But let's be honest, there was this initial spinning of the ball in completely the other direction. And when you talk about, someone mentioned like lying about the vaccine, to me, the biggest lies came from Donald Trump. Like he retweeted a couple times that the CDC, instances of death from COVID weren't real numbers, that kind of thing. And that's just a flagrant lie, right? And it clearly in his favor. I'm curious if you agree with that.
We're gonna see if me and you can have a civil conversation here, because we're getting into really territory I think we do have strong disagreement on, um, and we both have strong sort of emotional commitment to each of our positions. So I think it's going to be tough. We'll see if we can do this. Maybe we can agree to disagree. I found myself reacting pretty strongly whenever you're talking, and I also am trying to make sure that I um, respond the right way. And I almost am doubting myself whether I can be reasonable, but I'm going to try, because I'm going to do my best, and I may be imperfect, and I may be stubborn on this point, and have a little bit of blinders on, because um, I see things quite differently. So I voted for Biden over Trump during in 2020. Um, Gosh, it feels like so long ago. Um, because the way that Trump handled the pandemic was so horrific, and to me at that time, the way that I felt at the time. Um, and so I voted for Biden. And so and before that, I had been a lifelong Democrat, never seriously entertained. Although 2016, Trump was entertaining and he resonated with me on some level, but I still supported Hillary. Uh, and Before that, 100% straight down the middle, always Democrat, big Obama fan, all that stuff. So, and I come from the left, and so I had a sort of turnaround on this in late 2022, and so I'm saying, as somebody who sees your point of view, but I'm also um, kind of partisan here. So let me just say straight out. I think when we talk about the economy during the election year, that makes sense. That's self-interested, and if that was his only motivation, that's clearly uh, selfish, ridiculously selfish, and not the right motivation to have. 100%. I think that's indisputable. But 2 points. That doesn't mean he's wrong. And let me explain. The economy is not something that is pointless, right? Now we can compare the value of human life, and this is the calculus that I had when I was originally very strongly opposed to Trump, a huge Fauci fan, and I was a COVIDian. I really strongly believed in vaccine mandates and mask mandates. I even believed like people should be kept in their houses. Police should force them back into their houses, because I was so like, why would these selfish people want to endanger other people's lives? Those are bad people. Like, this is my position. I was hardcore in that
Can
area.
can I say something
But
real quick?
yeah,
I, by the way, uh, that's way more extreme than I was for
sure.
whatever, just for whatever it's worth. Like
Okay.
I
Yep.
got vaccinated, I wore a mask, but then I stopped wearing the mask as soon as they told us not to. Like I kind of was like, all
Yeah.
right, I'll wash my hands, whatever. So you were more extreme on that than I was.
Oh,
Not
super,
that I was
super
right,
extreme.
but
No, super extreme. But for me, it was like lives. Life has the paramount value, and who gives a shit about the economy? You know, like human life. If you care about the economy, you're just like some rich person who wants to like keep their money, and you don't care about people dying. And so we should, just like what Andrew Cuomo said, if all what we're doing does is just save one life, then it's worth it. And many other public figures have made similar sorts of statements. I think that was sort of the reigning ideology for these extreme measures, or at least that was the extreme version of that ideology. And so that's what I believed in. But I think now the economy and people's day-to-day lives, these are not inconsequential things. So
yeah,
one more abstract argument, which I don't think most people resonates with most people, but it's a good intellectual argument, is that lack of economic growth, right, in the long term,
yep,
results in a worse life expectancy. So you actually get loss of life by shutting down by preventing the growth of the economy. And of course, people tried to make the argument that, well, shutdowns would actually allow us to get back the economy working faster sooner, which is probably not true. But that was the way to deal with that. But the point is that from a strictly life saved perspective, shutting down the economy isn't necessarily, even if it did save lives, which I don't think the data shows that, but even if it did, um, then you could still lose lives from the economy being shut down. But on a deeper level, I think the shutdowns of society,
or
uh,
harm lives, right? Not even if people don't die, you'd still harm people, right?
they
To
harm
your
lives.
point,
I think they did kill people directly, personally. This is I think there's some I mean there this is we're going down. Well, actually, you know what? I'm canceled, so I can talk about this shit. I think that um I think that literally uh what happened during 2020, what was the big event besides COVID? Those were the Black Lives Matters protests, right? Those protests would never have happened if it wasn't for the lockdowns. If you remember the people trying to get everybody to protest, they're like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And the reason they knew that, they were saying that, is because everybody's stuck at home. Everybody can go protest.
yeah,
This
that's
is
funny. I always wondered about that. I was like, who has time to to do
That
this?
was why. I mean, that was why. And so a close friend of mine has said to me whenever I talk to him about this, he doesn't touch this issue because it's too toxic and he has too much to lose. I'm fine touching this issue now, although I've already been doing it, but I'm going to do it even more. Uh, these were like displaced lockdown protests almost. Like this was displaced, anxious energy, people pissed off. Uh, they were just going to go protest, and the outcome of those protests, which the public health establishment supported, like they supported like 100%. Greg Gonzalez and I think the Atlantic wrote about this. Of course, he's writing about this in the Nation, and you and the public health establishment was like 100% on board because, of course, the public health establishment is fully, call it woke, but they're certainly left wing now and almost homogeneously left wing, and so they supported these. The outcome of these protests was depolicing. That was part of the movement. Is
Can I ask a
police are? Go
quick
ahead.
question? If I'm
Yeah.
interrupting, I'll stop. Quick question. Can I ask?
Let me finish
Yeah, go ahead.
the train
Go
of
ahead.
thought because I'm almost done, and then we can.
Okay.
Depolicing caused, if you look at the data on homicides, accidents, it caused a massive spike that remains to the present day. That is continued to be elevated compared to historical uh, uh, what the historical projections would say it was. It's like way higher than it was just pre 2020 in terms of the homicides and the accidents among the black population. And that's believed by people who we can't yet say this openly, and it will be able to be said openly at some point, maybe in the 2020s. But it's it's almost certainly because of the depolicing that happened. And so you had this public health establishment that created essentially the possibilities for the Black Lives Matter protest. Then they actively supported it and said, "You got to support this if you're a good person who wants to save lives." Then they end up costing a lot of lives. And I'm not. I mean, as you can't say this in polite society, but they killed lots of black people as a result of these protests. The estimates, some estimates for the non-COVID deaths that are caused by these kinds of social disruptions and others, including like deferred cancer treatments, um, people, and you also point out people get depressed, anxious, quality of life issues, but the lives may be in the hundreds of thousands. And I'm not being a crazy crank. I'm saying this as somebody who has been engaging with you as a relatively rational person, I think. And so if that's true, which you can't say this because that's so politically third rail still, even though uh, COVID's over and people don't care about it as much, still you can't talk about it yet. If that's true, then it's not even, you know, I think Trump was right. I think shutting down the economy is not good. And we could also talk about the economy as sort of like a proxy way of talking about people's quality of life, people just wanting to live. That's not good. And then it leads to all these other things. So I think the balance between saving people from COVID, assuming the lockdowns could have ever done that, and I think severe enough lockdowns could have. I mean, if we had done it really severe and kept them going and not had any lift up on them, yeah, like China, yeah, like we could have waited for the vaccine. It could have happened. It will never happen in America, but in principle, in theory, it could have happened if we had like a totalitarian regime. Like if we could have done that, yeah, sure. Or if people had wanted to go along with it and would have accepted it, could have happened. But it didn't. And so I think Trump was right. Like I don't think Trump was. I think actually, um, if you look at the data on lockdowns, or sorry, the consensus within public health for decades, going back to there's this 2006 paper, highly influential at Johns Hopkins, written by one of the godfathers of this field, staunchly against lockdowns. If you look at uh, open letter published in March 3rd of 2020 by 800 public health officials and legal experts, so strongly against lockdowns for a lot of the same reasons that people on the political right are now considered to be against lockdowns. It was reigning public health consensus that was a very bad idea to disrupt society to the degree that lockdowns do for a dubious benefit in terms of deaths. Now, if you're China and you want to have like drones flying around everywhere and they like shoot laser beams at you if you come out of the house, that's that could work. But according to the Western American consensus, the
Yeah.
way that it would be done here, it doesn't work. So what I'm saying is, what if the people who politicized lockdown, like the pandemic at the first place, were on the left? What if Trump was actually the one who was not politicized? Now, to the degree that you say it was because it was an election season, if he actually ever said that, that's pretty damning, and that's not good. But then the argument to that, even if that's true, that that was his personal motivation, he could be right by chance. Like like by chance, even though he's self-interested and doing things for the wrong reasons, he could still come to the right conclusions. And my belief is that even if he had corrupt motives, he was still right. And the people who politicized the pandemic and went against what was reasonable, in my opinion, were the left because they had this ideology of saving human lives at any cost, which was based in my opinion, their sort of political ideology of protecting the victims, all this sort of. So that would be my take. My take is that actually the original sin of politicization may have come from the left.
Well, all good points, all fair points, I think. And I like to say, my background is originally in physics, and in physics, for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction, right? Newton's laws of physics. And I'm not an expert in politics either, but from what I've seen in politics, there's almost like this physical law of like for every action, there's an equal and opposite overreaction. And I think that happens all the time, right? One side acts, the other side overreacts.
Let me interrupt you because I feel like I know what you're going, and correct me if I'm wrong because I didn't address this part. I 100% agree that there is this toxic and remains a very toxic interaction between the left and Trump in particular, right? There is
Yeah.
Yes, and there is Trump derangement syndrome. That's what we call it on the right. If I consider myself on the right, there's Trump derangement syndrome. They get deranged by what Trump does. Like uh, he trolls them hard, and he causes them to react. And yes, they do. There's this dance where they start to become as toxic as him, and he's as toxic as them. I
Yeah.
think the way that people on the right see this, and the way that maybe I'm so far down the rabbit hole on the right that I see this way. Maybe this is wrong. I don't know. But the way my reframing, my playing devil's advocate, my sort of is that Trump is originally a reaction to the left. The reason Trump exists, and this is sort of
Yeah.
a view
Yeah.
held on the right, the reason Trump exists is as a symptom of a pathology in our institutions and on the left. And basically, the left wing takeover of our institutions. And Trump is sort of like the champion who's going to restore order to a situation that has lost order. And that's the way that right wingers would see it. So we would blame you guys on the left because we think that Trump is a symptom of a more fundamental dysfunction coming from,
So the
yeah.
good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Or but it may also come from not just the political left, but it may come from ultimately like neoliberalism. There may be even more further uh, dysfunctions. But yeah, anyway,
I,
anyway,
I,
the
I was
left
just
may
going
be a
to make
reaction to other problems. So I'll
one
let you go. Yeah.
clarification. I won't debate you on all that because I also think you're correct on a lot of those things. But just one clarification of what I was communicating earlier. I agree that Trump and Biden, for that matter, uh, was not wrong to care about the economy and to weigh that in the balance, the harm caused by shutting down the economy versus the harm caused by COVID. I agree. That's a difficult, I don't know the correct answer to that problem. In Houston, for example, there were times when there was like yellow caution tape around the playgrounds originally, right? And the parents would just go to the park and say, "I can't, like my kids need to go play at the park. Okay, we're good. We'll take our chances." And they just take down the tape. So I agree that people erred too far, in the far right lane of the highway or the far left lane of the highway, and who knows what the correct answer was. Absolutely, the economy has to weigh into the balance. The criticism I was making is, when Trump said, like in February and March and April and that kind of thing, things like, uh, yeah, COVID's going away. Like the cases are going to plummet and it's going to go away. He knew that there was absolutely no reason to believe that, right? So it's one thing to weigh the economy. It's another thing to just lie, right? And he clearly lied. There was another instance where he was out campaigning, right? And he criticized Biden for not campaigning. He was out campaigning before there was a vaccine, these rallies, and a journalist asked Trump one time, like, "Aren't you afraid of COVID infection?" And Trump said, "No, because I'm way up on the stage and I'm behind a big glass thing. So I'm not worried about COVID infection." Totally missing the point that his audience was exposed to COVID infection for his
Right.
benefit, right? So
Yeah.
that doesn't help the economy. Like a Trump rally is totally different, right? That's a completely selfish act by candidate Trump in 2020 versus, hey, let's keep the economy open for jobs. Okay, that absolutely, there's a valid debate to be had there among like, sensible people. But anyway, but it almost doesn't matter, right? I think we kind of violently
I don't
agree.
disagree. Yeah, I don't.
Whoever fired the
Yeah.
first shot, there's exaggerations and lack of clarity on, you could argue, from lots of different quarters on vaccines, and it's certainly a non-trivial issue.
I, I think the entire pandemic was politicized on both the left and the right, and the adults weren't running the show. And I think whatever the cause of that is, it's obviously the probably the central, I mean, at least the central, it is the central problem, at least in governing and managing the pandemic. The experts were not. I honestly think somebody like Scott Atlas, and even if you're on the left and you don't agree but somebody on the left who has Scott Atlas's um, sort of scientific orientation, I think should have been managing the pandemic. And people, and honestly, I think that tends to be people on my side. That's a bias, but um, yeah, but the pandemic was politicized on both sides, and Trump obviously, I agree, especially with that kind of narcissistic saying that he just did yeah, I agree. There was another point that you made though about, oh yeah, the I will say, whenever he says that he thought it's all going to go away, it's all going to be gone tomorrow, I think he really believed that. He really wanted to
Yeah,
believe that.
I
I
go
mean,
ahead.
like,
Sorry,
think
what
about
you
this.
mean?
Think about this. Obviously, if it didn't go away in a week, people would be calling him out. If it didn't go away in a month, people would be calling him out. He didn't say that just so that, like, he looks like an idiot in a month.
He,
If he knew that
yeah,
in a month it wasn't, you know, like
that's a
he really
totally
just
so.
passionately wanted the virus to go away. He just really wanted it to go
I've
away. So he said.
I've been thinking, I've been thinking about the distortions of the truth that Trump makes for a while, and I've often thought, like, do you think like that was the key confusion for me? Is like, does he really believe it or does he just say it? And I think the the giveaway is when Trump really believes something that turns out not to be true, it's always in his favor, right? If he just believed stuff that didn't turn out to be true, half the
No.
time it would be out of his favor, half the time it would be in his favor, but
I
it's
don't think he would get.
always,
No, 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 no,
and
no.
there's
I
enough
think you're missing.
instances where he gives the game away,
Yeah.
right? Like he told Bob Woodward,
No,
he told him in privately, yeah, I tried to downplay the virus. He admitted it. So we know that he was doing that consciously.
um. Well, I mean, if you okay, now we're getting to like
That's
that
my
that
opinion. I could be wrong. I
that's
mean, I'm not
no,
a
no.
mind
I hear
reader,
you. I
right?
hear you. I hear your opinion. That's a very good point, and I want to get into the nitty gritty of the psychology there. And I don't think that would be productive because I think that's very technical, and also you have a strong point, and it's hard for me to. Although I think that I could still be right. I think your point is very strong, and I will say this. My suspicion, and I don't know that you could be right. You may be right, but my sense, my gut intuition about Trump is whenever he says things that are only sort of in his favor, that are turn out to be false. I think he really is the kind of person who kind of wills the world into, you know what I mean? I think he says things that he wants to be true, and it's not that he knows. Maybe he does know that they're wrong, um, or maybe he thinks they could be wrong. Yeah, but I think he's kind of yeah. No,
Like
I mean
let's
I'm not,
contrast. Like
but I
here's a
don't think I don't think he's like as he's saying these things. I don't think his mental state is. Maybe this is just academic, but I think it's kind of important. I don't think his mental state is like, oh, I know this is wrong, but like I'm going to tell these people, haha. Like I think it's more like I really want this to be true, and I'm convincing myself. I think he really is convincing himself, but I could be wrong. It may be academic at this point. We may be, but I
Well, the important thing, I mean, it is academic, but the important thing is what should we do about it, right? And I think like the, it goes back to the tale of the boy who cried wolf. We all know that story, right? The whole point of the boy who cried wolf, he lied, 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 and then there was a wolf.
yeah.
In the end, there was a wolf. In the end, the boy was telling the truth. And the point of
Which
that tale
boy?
is, sorry,
That
the
okay, yeah,
fable,
yeah.
like Aesop's
In the
fable,
actual fable. Okay,
or
I thought you were
yeah,
yeah. In the fable. Okay, go ahead.
the fable, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The famous story about why you shouldn't lie, because then people won't
Yeah, yeah,
believe you.
yeah,
And then
yeah, yeah.
the thing people always miss about that story is how do you treat a liar? And at the end of the day, like the interface between us and Donald Trump and people who are thinking about getting vaccinated and their relationship to the evidence and how that's colored by, I think, Donald Trump to some extent, that interface looks the same whether he's lying intentionally or just because he convinces himself because he wants it to be true. Like it's the same
Yeah.
result. If you contrast that with like Eisenhower writing a letter to troops on D-Day. He didn't, if you look at his letter, he says the enemy is going to fight viciously. This is going to be a long, hard campaign. He didn't say what he wanted to be true, right? He didn't say, we're going to go in there and the war will be over before Christmas. You see what I'm
I
saying?
think,
So that,
listen, I think all of us want a world with less lies, but I mean, are we gonna elect? I mean, we're getting down another road, but are we gonna elect Biden again? I mean, like that's our question on the right, and or actually among Americans, right? Like, yeah, maybe Trump lies, but Biden, you know? So I hear you. I don't know. Maybe I interrupted you. Maybe you're gonna make another point. Like, I don't know if you're gonna make the point
no, I was
we
just
shouldn't
saying,
elect Trump,
I,
but
I,
yeah.
I guess I'll be quiet after this because I'm sorry. I know I've hogged the mic,
No,
but
no, no. It's great. It's an interesting conversation, and I apologize for interrupting you. So,
no worries. I'll just close by saying, and then I'll let you speak. I'll close by kind of tying this back to the vaccine, right? And the comments that were made earlier. Hey, the medical establishment, there wasn't an honest enough conversation with the public about the risks of the vaccine. Personally, I feel just as informed about the vaccine today as I did when I got the Pfizer vaccine whenever it was
hmm.
available originally. I had heard, yep, there may be myocarditis. It sounds like it's very rare. We obviously have like a 6-month clinical trial. We don't know what the long-term effects of the virus are. We don't know what the long-term effects of the vaccine are. You're probably going to get exposed to the virus. So it's a relative risk question. I happen to be, I'm not very old. I'm not like unhealthy, so to speak, but I made my choice on the advice of my doctor. But the point I'm making is, regardless of Biden versus Trump, that's like a separate issue. When it comes to the vaccine, um, I think what has to be disentangled and separated, there's a lot of noise in the signal of the evidence around the vaccine. And what has to be separated is CNN and Fox News. Yep, those are politicized talking heads on TV. The medical establishment, I think, has the best evidence that people should look at, or they should talk to their doctor. That medical establishment may have, in some instances, had their hackles raised because they were under attack. And who was attacking them, right? It originated from, unfortunately, I think, the president of the United States, and that was like an unforced error. And people are kind of stuck with it. Like Trump himself was vaccinated,
Yeah,
but a lot of his supporters still can't disentangle that.
look, man, I was kicked out of medical school, right? So I'm emotional about this stuff. I really don't think the people in the medical establishment are the good guys. I just don't think so. And the reason is I think they are
I'm
just
sorry to hear
so,
that, by the way. I don't know anything about your
man, because
experience, so sorry to hear that.
yeah, I'm sorry. No, it's they are politicized too. It's not just Trump, man. It's like all our institutions are politicized. And I think, man, I think Trump was a reaction, and he made it worse. He galvanized it. He made something that was already polarized, and he just like it got hyper polarized once he got in, because he was that target that they then just resisted. But that structure was already there, and if when Trump's gone, it'll still be there. It is there right now, right? Biden is the president, and they are still like the all the professional establishment is all woke. It's all left wing now. It's all, and I don't know. Maybe I'm sounding like a crazy
I'm
person
laughing because
because
I'm an old, I don't know, lefty or whatever, and I don't really identify
well,
with wokeism
I
myself,
I
so
I was
I can
you
sympathize.
know I'm an old lefty. I remember reading Marx, and I read Das Kapital, and like in a reading group with people who are a bunch of professors now, and I was reading Foucault. I was reading critical theory all the time. I was a hardcore lefty. Um, Wokeism was always weird to me, and I could never get on board with it, even though I was on the left, because the cultural stuff was kind of seemed dumb to me compared to economics. That's a whole nother thing. But um, so man, I just can't see it that way. I mean, I just think yes, they're reacting, but they're reacting because they are on the left. they're reacting because they're just as hardcore on the left as Trump is MAGA, you know?
So it sounds like you think there's like an arms race of nonsense.
Yes, and we have no center of authority anymore, which is the most terrifying thing in our society right now. We have no adults in the room that are running things anymore. They are all politicized. Everybody's politicized, and the people who are not, I would like to think everybody's politicized. Everything is politicized. And the people who are running, the people who are making the decisions, the people with the power are making political, clearly partisan decisions. There's no, and I think I'll go further, man. I'm gonna make an anti-left wing position. I sound kind of neutral right now, but I can't. I really do think that if people who are not politicized, I think I think that's like the small group of people who I talk about COVID with. I think Jay Bhattacharya, I think Vinay Prasad. Of course, we're critical, but I think we're science based, and I think if a truly science based perspective came to be in the CDC, right? I mean, it's hard because I think of science as now. I know I'm so partisan. I can't think of my side as anything but the scientific side anymore. So I'm probably like as delusional as the other side is at this point. So I want to be honest, but I think if you really, okay, how about I think this is a way to be honest. I think if you really had a truly evidence-based perspective on all the issues of the day, whether it's DEI or how to manage the pandemic, like how do we produce the best outcomes for society without ideology? I think that point of view would be considered right wing, and it would be considered bad in the society now. I literally, genuinely believe that a sort of value free, let's get politics out of medicine point of view is considered right wing now.
Well,
I
I'd love
think,
to.
yeah.
You're great to talk to, and I really like talk. I'd love to keep talking, but I'm worried. So keep going. I'm just gonna not
Yeah.
respond because I'm just worried that I've hogged the mic too much.
Oh, I'm done. I was trying to hog the last word, honestly. I feel a little bit guilty for that as well. But
No, go for it. You can have the last word. That's fine.
this is what I think, and I passionately believe this is the truth. I could be wrong. I've been wrong countless times in my life, so I'm probably wrong. But like, I just can't see it any differently right now. Um, and I think that is just. I think I think the left, man, I think the left is the root of all evil in this society. And that's, you're going to say it's Trump. I can't help but we can't help but think the way we think. And so that's just what I think. So
Well,
that's
for
all.
what's worth, it doesn't bother me to hear you say that. I mean, that's why I'm here, just like have a discussion. So have at it.
Y- Yeah. Yeah. All right. Is everybody left? I haven't even checked. I think everybody may be gone now, or I hope not. How many people do we still have here? We still have 20 others. We lost like five. So does anybody else want to talk after that long? Let's see who else is. Anybody else want to talk? Or you guys all fell asleep? So if anybody else wants to talk, we can. Uh-oh, we have unethical skeptic in here. Um, he's spying on. Anyway, I'm just making a dumb comment. So anybody else want to talk? You can, and I'll look at the request and we can do that. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Okay,
I,
I'll give like a couple. Okay, what's up?
I I'd like to keep talking, but
We
nobody
can
else
if you want.
but nobody
Yeah, if
probably wants me to keep talking.
nobody else is requesting,
Well,
so that's fine. And I
I,
guess still there's still 20 people left. So
is that okay? If it's okay with you, I mean, it's your space. I'll
somebody
be quiet.
requested. So somebody did request.
Okay, I'll
So
defer to them then.
and I two more people left in the meantime. And maybe this will be our last one then. Um, we'll add this fellow.
least for Kevin too. Noticing that I've seen some of the people. I mean, I'm interested. I always mention that I'm leftist, but I'm not particularly woke or anything like that. I do hear people, at least like on the right now, that seem to be disparaging to all vaccines. So, Kevin, do you make any statement on like the regular vaccines versus the COVID one?
Yeah, I'll be as like honest as possible because I mean, I guess I can be. Uh, so yeah, I haven't looked into the other vaccines at all. And my training as a medical student, when I was a medical student, or not just a medical student, as my training as a quote unquote good person, uh, you know, I've always believed that the vaccines are great, and I just have never really looked at the evidence one way or the other. So my default point of view is to still hold that belief until I examine it, and my goal is to re-examine it while also being very critical of or skeptical of anything that I'm reading. There's this one sort of book that the anti-vaxxers love called Turtles All the Way Down, and I haven't read that one. I'm looking forward to reading it. It could be crazy or it could be like really interesting. I know that there's and so again, I don't have strong. I haven't like read really deep. I know that there's a guy at the BMJ named Peter Doshi, and apparently he's very intelligent. He knows some of my friends, and some of my friends have talked to him at length and say he's a very smart guy, and he's pretty skeptical about a lot of the vaccines. It's sort of a third rail. But yeah, my kids have gotten vaccinated with everything, and I just haven't looked into it yet. And my default position would be like, yeah, you should probably get your kids vaccinated with everything. But I also just don't. Also, I just haven't looked at the data myself, so I wouldn't be able to tell you scientifically.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. What I'm assuming though also is that there's been a lot of stuff that's been almost wiped out by the use of vaccines. Where if you're just fresh right now, you might look at it being like, well, I don't really have to take a vaccine. There's not that a lot of that around. But if we actually had started from, it's still just been in the environment, I think it'd be a much different story.
okay, yeah. Let me make a few qualifications there as well. I think. I think I'll say a few things. I'll say first off, well, it's okay. I'll say one critical thing and then I'll agree with you. First off, I think most of the reduction in infectious disease in America and in the West has been the result of sanitation and better nutrition. But you are 100% correct that if we stop, say, vaccinating with measles, then we're going to get widespread measles outbreaks, which we're having measles outbreaks right now in the United States because we have a lot of vaccine hesitancy now. And that's going to happen. And as far as the MMR vaccine causing autism, I think it's very clearly been demonstrated that that's not the case, uh, that it's not causing autism. There's some really good studies, one out of Denmark, that shows that that's true. So if anybody's worried about autism, I feel very confident saying that the MMR vaccine is not going to cause autism. And so from everything that I know, especially about those very common childhood infectious diseases, the vaccine seemed like a good idea, and we are going to have more measles. And measles is terrible. It's not like chickenpox. It causes disability at a relatively high rate. It's not going to kill most kids, but they can like lose their ability to hear. There's much, you lose quality of life. You probably lose years of on your lifespan as a result of having these disabilities because they probably impair your ability to function and then they'll impair your economic activity and all this stuff. So I think the vaccines are good, especially a lot of those childhood vaccines and some of at least some, but I need to learn everything about this, and I don't. So I'm not going to say one way or the other. And also, I'm not representing the medical establishment anymore so it's not important, um, but I haven't looked deep into the data and I can't make strong statements on it. So if somebody else wants to do that, they can, and they can say, go get your kids vaccinated. But like, I haven't looked at the data myself. I just know enough about the whole autism thing that that's not true. at least with respect to MMR. Now, maybe some of the other vaccines may. We certainly have an epidemic of autism, which could be due to all sorts of other things not related to the vaccines necessarily. But yeah, so in general, again, my kids are all vaccinated. I'm becoming more vaccine skeptical in the short term. I may turn around and end up endorsing all vaccines again completely because I've gone through the evidence, but because of my own sort of disenchantment with with experts, I personally try to not say anything that I don't know for sure anymore. So
Yeah, and I just wanted to finally add, I'm really happy that like in general you're always trying to look at things as like basically as well, not basically as a scientist, trying to use critical thinking. And I do want to say though also that I think there are plenty of people in this country that are classically left that don't identify as much with the current party in terms of the left party that's in power with Biden and stuff like that. Even though, like for example, I voted for Biden and Obama and all that stuff too. It's just interesting when I guess you get to a point too where it's like you just want people to stop lying, and I don't even know if that's a possibility for politicians. But I'm just happy though that I think you can never go wrong if you continue to try to critically think and try to look at data and speak your mind, hopefully.
yeah, yes, I'm 100% on board with that, and I think that's a great note to end on. I think that if we all do that more and we all realize that we're flawed and that we have motivated reasons for thinking things and that we can be wrong and probably are wrong about a lot of things, and we remember all the times we've been wrong about things we felt strongly about, and then try to be humble and realize that we could be wrong about the current things we believe and really try to grow in our knowledge as opposed to being right. We're not trying to be right. We're trying to become better people, because if we're wrong and we find out we're wrong, then we can improve our knowledge and become better and make better decisions. So finding out we're wrong is a good thing, uh, so that we can grow. So I think if we all have that mentality and we all realize that we're in the midst of like kind of a hurricane right now of politics that very well could get worse. It probably will get worse. But if we maintain our own integrity internally and try to build our own character and become the best people we can on the inside, then I think if we all do that as a society, if everybody decided to do that, things would be so much less bad and we can make the world a better place. And so I think, um, you know, that's all there is, that's all there is. I think that's the point of life, um, is to try to live the most moral and upright life we can. And I think part of that is being honest and trying to come to the right beliefs, because that allows us to make the right decisions. So
Yeah,
I think I
and I'll
agree.
say,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
I was just going to say that I pretty much will end on, or at least from my statement, that something I came across recently that I thought really resonated with me is that the point of a discussion between two people is not to win the discussion as much as it is to understand the other person that you're talking to.
yes, 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 and yes, and to I agree with that. I think that's a great. Um, I think that's actually a beautiful sentiment to end on. That should be the um, the slogan of these spaces. Is the point is not so much to win the conversation, but to understand, or even to come to a mutual understanding at the end, between two people. Um, I think that's a beautiful sentiment. So thank you for that. So I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. I'll probably upload this to my YouTube. I'm gonna probably just start uploading everything. We'll put it under what we'll call the Forbidden Science podcast, where we basically talk about all sorts of things we shouldn't be talking about. Hopefully, we'll talk about race, and like genetics and stuff, and do stuff that nobody's allowed to talk about at all. And I'll do like trans issues. We'll also just do bread and butter, um, like health information, statins. What is that? rapamycin, longevity science, weight loss, weight management, diet, nutrition. That used to be my bread and butter stuff, the stuff that I used to be fascinated with. We'll do some of that stuff. And so we'll just have all sorts of topics on sort of the cutting edge, controversial, and we'll just, you know, go at them from a science-based perspective. Some of the stuff will be in spaces, as we're doing right now. Some of the stuff will be me solo, although I prefer talking to other people. And some of it will be like interviews and stuff, but I'll pretty much put all of it on the Forbidden Science podcast, and I guess I'll put a label. So some of them will be labeled spaces and interviews, etc. And we'll just address some of these issues. If you guys want to support me, right now I am trying to figure out what I'm doing. As some people know, I'm basically trying to challenge my school on the narrative that they've put forward about me as a person, because I think it's been incredibly unfair and immoral, immoral what they've done. I think they've drank some Kool-Aid that is kind of very similar to the Kool-Aid that was drank during COVID, and I think that's sad. And yeah, so as I'm progressing and trying to figure out what I'm going to do there and publishing my account about that, and then of course things are going to end up in court and stuff like that. If people want to support the public, the sort of science communication that I'm doing, try to put out sort of the most honest, but also hopefully interesting science communication on all sorts of these different topics that are third rail, and which I think that I am pretty good at treating objectively, even, you know, when it comes to talking with people on the other end of the spectrum. If anybody wants to support that, signing up for the Substack would be awesome. I really need more paid subscribers. Free subscribers are also great, and so the Substack is going to be Kevin Bass, KEVINBASS. That's different than the Twitter. It's going to be one N, KEVINBASS on Substack, and that will allow you to help support me. It's $9 a month. There's no subscriptions on X right now because I reset my. It'll take time for them to reapprove me for whatever reasons I don't want to get into. And yeah, if you could support me on my Substack, that'd be great. Just sort of $9 a month to help me sort of make ends meet until I figure out exactly what I'm doing. There's also a Give, Send, Go. You can check that out. I'll post about that periodically. It's also on some of my Substack posts on the topic of my medical school issue. It'll help me to pay my legal expenses. And basically, I'm looking for pro bono representation, and then also I'm paying some advisory expenses to another lawyer as I get some of his help. He's most familiar with my case, and yeah, so just some financial support would be great. But you guys can also just listen for free. I hope that these discussions and these conversations and the way that I'm communicating science is interesting, because I'm always really just trying to get the truth. I can't help it. Like, like I'm always, I don't see any point unless you're trying to get to the truth. So I could always lie and try to get my own way on things, but that seems dumb and seems like a way to waste your life, to live in sort of a lie. You know, we only have one life to live. We have a legacy that we're going to leave behind to everybody that's coming after us. And if it's a legacy of truth, then people after us can follow it and build good things and build things that will last and benefit others and keep human civilization going. But if it's a legacy of lies, then they'll also use that information and that will cause destruction. And so I think, you know, we live on through the people that come after us. Our legacy does. And so we want our legacy to be one of truth. And that's sort of my motto. And so I hope you guys can join me in that and come to more of these spaces over time and follow along as we talk about all these sorts of issues. And I appreciate this conversation. I think this is a really cool space. This is like one of the coolest ones I've done. This is really cool. So I appreciate all this. Maybe this is probably the best one I've done so far. So this is great for a new space. we're sort of starting things up afresh. This is a great start. So I appreciate all that from all you guys, and I hope to see you guys soon. Peace.
Thank you, Kevin.